Hello, my name is Professor Kevin Hilton. I'm the Independent Chair of the Sheffield Race Equality Commission. I am based at Leeds Beckett University, where I was head of the Research Centre for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and more recently the Interim Pro-Vice Chancellor, Culture, Equality and Inclusion at the University of Sussex. The Race Equality Commission is a non-partisan strategic assessment into the nature, extent, causes and impacts of racism and racial disparities in Sheffield. Working with 24 commissioners from the Sheffield area, we conducted a series of short, focused hearings over 6 priority areas for the city. These included business and employment, civic life and communities, crime and justice, education, health, sport and culture. In May 2022, we will be presenting the findings and recommendations for the report that will be made available to the public on the Sheffield City Council website. This is the Crime and Justice hearing, part 1. Thanks again for your submission, and before we get going, I'm just going to invite Adele Robinson just to go through a little bit of the housekeeping before I introduce the commissioners. Thank you, Adele.
Okay. Good morning, Simon. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Commission before we begin and take you through some things. So, as you know, the Race Equality Commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of race inequality and racism in Sheffield. The Commission was established to focus on 6 key themes: health, education, civic life and communities, business and employment, crime and justice, and sport and culture. And today is the first day of the crime and justice hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there'll be a report that we sent to key stakeholders for action in Sheffield. The Commission has invited you as a witness here today to share your experiences and insights into some of the terms of reference for the Commission. And these 5 kind of main areas of the terms of reference are your knowledge of racial inequality and racism within Sheffield, which you think may be of use to the Commission, any knowledge of your or other approaches to race-related duties and frameworks, any analysis of the causes of racism or racial inequality within the sector that you work or are in, any examples of good practice in relation to reducing racism or racial inequality, on what you believe to be the best way to tackle racism or racial inequality within the city. By being a witness here today, you're required to act in good faith, and we're assuming that you are doing so. The session is being recorded and will be available on the Commission's website afterwards. Any non-confidential evidence that you have submitted will also be on the Commission's website in the future. Can I note, can anyone wait for an invitation from the chair before speaking? And can all commissioners and invited guests please introduce yourself before speaking? If commissioners have any questions, can you put them in the chat to me personally, and I'll send them on to the chair. And now I'd like to hand you back to Professor Kevin Hilton, the independent chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Adele. Simon, as you can see, I'm joined by commissioners from the Race Equality Commission, who I will invite to speak with you shortly. Before doing that, I wonder if you could say a bit about yourself, the capacity in which you're joining us, and maybe give us some of the highlights, just the highlights from your submission. You don't need to go into the submission in detail, because the commissioners have sight of your submission. Is that okay, Simon?
Yeah, that's fine, Kevin. I suppose my background is that I have been involved around the area of education, social care, and exclusions, really spanning quite an interesting period in Sheffield when we did actually used to do stuff. And if you like, I kind of was well placed in those areas to kind of give a good account of what stuff we used to do quite well. So going right back to sort of around 2000, I suppose, or a bit before that, I worked at in Sedaka, the Sheffield and District African Caribbean Community Association, running a study support scheme where we made links with schools, with teachers and volunteers who would come in to help to give one-to-one support as supplementary provision for the African and Caribbean community in Sheffield. After that, I went on to being a learning mentor at Firth Park School, which had a particular issue at the time with disproportionate exclusions for BME pupils, and worked developing stuff to reduce that. And then as a result of it, developed a specific resource for mixed heritage children, which is the biggest non-white ethnic group in Sheffield. And at that time, we identified that there were a number of problems that this group faced where no solutions were being looked at. So where you know, the Yemeni community might have a Yemeni community association, for instance, if you're mixed heritage, where is your community association? Where is the organization that can help you deal with the effects of institutional racism that you face? And even if it was there, would your parents know how to access it? Often we had children who were, have a single white parent, would face racism at school, but wouldn't be getting the kind of ideological and cultural resources that they need at home to be able to deal with that in an effective way. We found that the children often suffered with low self-esteem and a sort of negative identity which they internalized, and that this was affecting their behavior at school. But also found that there were a whole number of ethnic minority children who were responding to institutional racism in a way that wasn't helpful to them in pursuing their education, and a worsening relationship between teachers and pupils, which was not being addressed. So on the back of that work, with some funding that was available, we set up the Multiple Heritage Service in Sheffield City Council, which specifically dealt with some of those problems. So there was identity work, there was work in reducing exclusions, there was work with the looked after children's services and social services. There was a link with mental health. We did residentials. We did one-to-one work where we recruited mentors who from the local community who could work one-to-one with the kids, as well as the group work, which we knew was effective. And after that, I worked at MTAS, at the Ethnic Minority and Travellers Achievement Service, which did a number of important things. One was targeting BME kids citywide who were at risk of not achieving their potential in terms of GCSE grades, and kind of, if you like, having a supplementary school to raise their attainment. And I was managing a project which was funded by the DFES to reduce BME exclusions at in Sheffield. So we work with 5 Sheffield schools with kids that have been identified by the data to be at risk of permanent exclusions. In other words, they were having a high number of internal exclusions, temporary exclusions, or serious incidents recorded on the SIMS or similar database. And this was were very effective and evaluated. So we've done a number of good things in the past that aren't happening now, but they need to be happening now because the exclusion to prison pipeline. That if you don't want gangs in your city, don't feed them. Don't provide them with young people who have been excluded and have nowhere else to go. So really, it's about that kind of connect. I mean, this, if you like, my submission could go into any of the areas of your commission, really, and it overlaps all of them. It's just happened to come in here, but really we could talk about, and any of this is about mental health, it's about education, it's about youth work, it's about working with parents and community, it's about employment. So really it's taking a more of a holistic look at it all, and what can you do to make a difference. And that's why I've submitted an actual action plan of something that can be done immediately to make a difference, so that work to be implemented.
Okay, Simon, sorry, before you get into that, I appreciate how you've overlaid, the complexities of the issues that you're talking about, and you are right, because we've had your evidence we've had your evidence for a while, and we've had a number of hearings where you could easily have joined us at those hearings, and the reason why you're in this hearing is because this was actually going to be the first hearing before Christmas 2020, and because of a number of reasons we moved this. So yes, we were hoping to have spoken to you a bit sooner, but in some ways we're kind of glad to be talking to you now, because we're able to make those interconnecting links with the other hearings that we've had, and we only have one more set of hearings to come in after this. Can I just ask, before I invite my colleague Winston Campbell to speak with you, you said that the work that you've been doing with at-risk children, children at risk of exclusion, was effective and evaluated. Do we have access to that evaluation, or a evaluation?
All I can say is that there is something on the DFES archives about it, I think,
we'll look into it.
I know it was. I mean, the DFES don't fund things and not evaluate them,
Yes.
Certainly. Hopefully you'll find. Hopefully you will be able to find that.
Yes, thanks. We'll look into that. If hopefully if the Secretariat is listening, we might even have it before you finish with us at 12. But Winston, can I invite you to ask your first question? But could you introduce yourself before you do?
Thanks, Kevin. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Winston.
My name's Winston Campbell. Just a little bit about myself, Simon. I have a social work background, worked 20 years in social work back in the 90s and 2000, left in 2004. A number of those 20 years was as a team manager working in the north of the city, working with children and families in need. And more recently, in the last 5 years, I, as a self-employed individual, am asked to do direct work with particularly young children on the cusp of coming into care, at risk of exclusion and criminality. So I do that on an adult basis, but on a regular basis over the last 5 years. Simon, thank you for your submission. It was very interesting reading and quite thought-provoking. And you're right, it does straddle all the themes that the commission are dealing with. What I sensed, having read your submission, was how disappointed you are in the service provision available to BME young people particularly, but BME communities as a whole. And you mentioned in your personal statement, Simon, that Sheffield used to be better. Can you share with us what you're referring to when you make that statement, and what was it better at, and what's your reasoning for that?
Okay, so I think kind of, well, what it was better at, firstly, having a centralized service, particularly looking at education that could address these things. So there'd be a yearly conference which invited head teachers and school leaderships and other sort of interested parties in the schools who worked around the area of race equality to come to a conference which EMAS used to hold. So if you like, there's already like a process of continuing professional development that's there to support leadership. Well, you know, with getting good international speakers and latest research and workshops and so on to help. So just things like that, to be honest, like there was a focus on it. Certainly, so there were resources where you could come and, you know, schools could access any of the literature for these things and get expertise. MTAS would go around and have meetings in all of the schools in Sheffield to discuss with them the race equality plan that should be written in to the schools, you know, the schools service plan about what they're doing. And it wouldn't just be about, you know, Black history and curriculum and things like that, but on every kind of single area of social life, the links to the community and so on, of you know, this is what you're not doing, this is what you could be doing. And then when we come back next year, we'll see how that's gone, evaluate it, and maybe we can add some more things. What's the next step? That's not happening. But there's so much more that could be done to address things. To go to the levels we're sort of at now, you'd have to go back pre-1984. You'd have to go back to before the creation of SUMAS, the Sheffield United Multi-Ethnic Education Service, and you know, you look at go to the National Government Archives and look at the meetings between the minutes of the meetings between SUMAS and EMAC in Sheffield City Council, headed by Bill Walton, who was at that time the head of the education service, who was up for it. He was really interested in driving the race equality agenda through education in Sheffield. When you've got a leadership like that, things move, things happen. You'd have to go back to before that, before 1984, to kind of have the lack of anything right now. And the evidence for the lack of anything happening around race equality in Sheffield is published. It's actually in the council's plans, the published plans. What are we going to achieve as a council? And you will not find any reference to race equality targets whatsoever. Now, if you don't have targets, smart targets, then you can't actually achieve anything. But if you don't even have smart targets, if you don't have any even vaguely expressed aspirations, there's no spotlight on the issue whatsoever. There's no focus, no funding, no effort, no intensity to do anything whatsoever. And that's where we are.
Simon, I'm going to come back to you about data and data analysis, how we use that and how that drives service delivery. But before I move on to that and other questions, are there any things that have improved? You mentioned things used to be better. Can you highlight anything that's improved in recent years for Black and ethnic minority young people and communities?
Not that I know of.
That's a firm no.
No, yeah. I mean, you know, I'm sorry to have to say that, Winston, but it seems to me that we were making progress, and now we've gone backwards. And it's not a surprise, because if you stop doing things that you know work, what are you going to have instead? You know, we have the situation, you know, where we can have pupil referral units that are like 60% Black. I mean, this is going back to the olden days. This is like going back to the 70s. You know, it's not the case that, you know, I mean, that, honestly, I can't think of anything, you know, good that's actually happening now that is having any effect on what's going on. But what worries me more is the fact it's not the fact that we're not doing anything. It's that you can see the effects of not doing anything absolutely graphically. Yeah, you can see that there are ethnic minority kids on the streets getting into trouble when they should be involved in something. You can see that. You can see the fact that you know, the Black kids are being disproportionately excluded. You can walk into the pupil referral units and you can see it. Now, if you can see it, why isn't something happening? You know, and the answers of what you can do is not rocket science, and it's not that expensive either.
Okay, Simon, judging from your comments, what you seem to be referring to is that leadership starts from the top, and it's at the top where we need to make change. In your submission, you mentioned that Sheffield's senior leadership workforce and other civic bodies is overwhelmingly white-led and not reflective of the communities. You talk about a lack of ethnic representation at the highest levels, something we've routinely heard across commissions. You also go on to talk about a race colourblind approach to service provision for Black and minority ethnic young people in communities. Are the two issues connected, is my first question, and if so, how? And whether connected or not, how are those two issues impacting on service provision for Black and ethnic minority communities and young people more specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot of fragmentation happening in service provision. So if you look at education, for instance, academies, for instance, and people, you know, like striking out in their own directions. And that means somebody needs to have the big picture. Yeah. So who should have that big picture would be the people who are sitting at the top in terms of the organisation and funding of that service provision. And that doesn't seem to be happening, which is why black kids are slipping through the net. So it seems to me that firstly, it's about expertise, and secondly, it's about communication. So ideally, you'd want the expertise in that leadership itself. Yeah, the people who know how to monitor the situation, because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have to fill in a monitoring form for just about anything I do. You know, get my vaccine, and I'm having a big conversation there before I get my vaccine about where my parents are from, and you know, all of this. It's all like, right, so what should we type? You know, and all of that. But it's a constant thing in my life. I've got to fill in the ethnic minority, you know, the ethnic monitoring form.
Yeah.
So that data is going somewhere. Yeah, but what's the point of collecting data if you're not going to look at it, analyze it, and form your policy on the basis of it? Yeah, that's the bit that's missing. So it seems to me you've got a white leadership there who sit in an echo chamber or a bubble, who think that one size fits all approach to provision is going to work for everybody. But on an unequal playing field, there are going to be winners and losers from the outset. And it's just, years ago, we would have known that and be trying to address it. We didn't always have the things we wanted. We didn't always have as much funding as we'd have liked and been able to do half the things that we'd have wanted to do, but we were always doing something.
How does diversity in leadership counter that race-blind approach?
Right. So firstly, you need the expertise, and the expertise is the people who, you know, usually they're going to be black, because that lived experience of racism is one, it's a resource, because if you've survived long enough to get a job in the council, you've got a load of skills that you can use to help young people who are struggling. Yeah. So what's worked for you, you can break that down, and that's a toolkit for somebody else going through similar things to what you went. So you've got that expertise. Yeah. Now the expertise needs to be informing policy. Yeah. So how does that happen? Either that expertise has to sit in the leadership itself, or the leadership has to have a really strong, close dialogue between. So you've got the white management and the black workforce, but they need to be talking to each other. Problem is, I talk to a lot of black workers, and actually there's even fear about raising suggestions or talking to the leadership anyway, because for whatever's gone on in the past, there's a breakdown in trust, and that should be the basis of communication. So that needs to be sorted out. Yeah.
Can you give us any examples of that poor communication between leadership and its workforce, particularly from black and ethnic minorities? And why do you think that fear exists?
I think it's well, I mean, it's going to come down to the experience of racism working in the council, isn't it? It's going to come down to that. So that's going to create a certain fear of talking to a white management that you feel is not on your side. Yeah.
Why do you feel the leadership have difficulty engaging with the black and ethnic minority workforce?
That I mean, you'd have to ask them. I mean, it would be pure speculation.
Well, it's speculating.
I mean, that's the thing, is you've got a bubble of people, and we don't know how they think.
Yeah.
And they don't know how we think.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That has to be broken.
And so how do you think we can go about ensuring that there's meaningful and lasting dialogue between leadership and its workforce, particularly BIM and minority ethnic workforce?
Right. Well, I mean, I think I think there does have to be black representation in that leadership. I think that needs to be broken immediately. I think they need to they need to rate expertise around these issues higher, so that they trust the expertise of their workforce and draw on that in order to make policy. Yeah. Otherwise, I think if you take expertise away from policy management, you've got, you know, people are very good at logistics and project managing and stuff like that, but it's not informing what that plan needs to look like. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just promote some people and give them some jobs and talk to them every day. That's the answer.
I mentioned earlier how insightful your submission was, and I just want to share with you some information, Simon. As part of the commission, we conducted a focus group of black males between 30 and 50 years old who shared with the commission their experiences of growing up as a black male in Sheffield, and of the continuing work they do with young black males within the community. One of the takeaways from that discussion was that the education system then and now is not set up or equipped to cater to the needs of young black males. They want them to say that black boys are often routinely labelled, often due to teachers not having the adequate skills to engage those young black boys. You too mentioned in your evidence of the skills deficit of many professionals when working with young black males. Can you give us some examples where there may have been low level of expertise to address the issues of supporting young black males in schools, and how that leads to the school to crime pipeline, that lack of expertise, and what that means for young black males?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's that the concept of loco parentis. Yeah, that when a child is away from their parents and they're in some kind of local authority care or school, or, you know, with a professional, that professional has to act effectively with the responsibilities of a parent. And I think for me, it's your effectiveness, your expertise at that is going to be how well can you actually see this child as your child, in effect. And I think that what racism does is that it breaks our natural human capacity for empathy, so that you don't see that child as your child. So, for instance, I remember having a meeting with a deputy head, and it was after school meeting. So as we turned up for this meeting, of course there was a boy there who turned up for detention. So the deputy head said to him, Shane, you're a good lad, aren't you? I know you sort of you make mistakes sometimes, don't you? But you're basically a good lad. Have this toffee crisp, and you know, go home and try and behave a bit better. And that struck me, because the head, this deputy head, was called Shane, and I said how easy that was for you to see the younger shame, and to therefore be able to remember yourself in that situation and to give that shame a break. But what if his name was Muhammad? Would that have been so easy for you to do? And of course he said, well, I don't know, it's hypothetical, but possibly not. And I think that's it, is that there's a sense that somehow this child is so different that we can't put ourselves in their shoes. And I think it in terms of service provision, I mean, I wouldn't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of times that a white colleague has said that they don't feel comfortable about being able to work with a black child, because they feel like it's out of their comfort zone, that they wouldn't have the relatability to be able to do it. But I've never heard a black colleague say that to me about a white child. In fact, if they let that be known, I guarantee they'd be up at some incapability hearing to say that they can't provide provision to white children. It would not be considered acceptable, would it? But we hear it from white workers all the time. Yeah,
that is unbelievable.
Sorry,
that is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and yet true. That's it shouldn't be believable. It shouldn't be a fact, should it? And yet there it is. And then when we look into schools, it's that same thing, isn't it? That basically we know from sort of psychology research that when we look at ourselves, we're more likely to give ourselves a break. We're more likely to say that the reason we're late is because the bus driver didn't stop, or because the alarm clock was wrong, or whatever it was, an external factor. But when we look at others, we're more likely to see it subjective. Oh, it's because he's lazy, he's incompetent, he's no drive or whatever, not badly organized. So when a teacher looks at a child, will they see external factors affecting their behavior or internal ones? And I think they're much more likely with a white child to see because they relate. I see myself in you. See myself in you, you get a break. A black child, I can't see myself in you. It must be you that's causing this behavior, not external things. And I think that's important. I mean, this is all kind of, the hidden curriculum. It's teaching 101, and this is like basic stuff that teachers need to know and look at and self-examine constantly to be a good teacher. But is it happening? Now, I think unless there is a voice continuously challenging schools and therefore teachers to evaluate themselves, then it's not, the focus isn't there, the spotlight's not there, so it doesn't happen, and the hidden mechanisms continue. And that's why I think there needs to be a part of the council provision that's about a permanent, continuous evaluation of all of these things, not just the schools, but the other departments, and it needs to be embedded. So that's why in the plan that I've written, if you like, it's about a centralized group of people who've got the resources and the focus to push this out.
In essence, what you're saying, Simon, is service provision to the ME community in Sheffield is flawed, and as a result of that, as you mentioned in your evidence, there are persistent unequal outcomes that they suffer as a result. Can you just very quickly just tell me what these unequal outcomes are that young black and minority ethnic young people face, and how might we go about disrupting that? I know you talked about it before. How might we go about disrupting those processes that lead to racial inequality?
Okay, so just as the problems are complex and overlapping, the solution needs to be also multi-layered. So, but it's not rocket science. So you can look at the level of the individual child, right? What can be done? First thing is, don't write off any young person whatsoever. Young people are incredibly adaptable, and even though it doesn't seem like it, sometimes you work with a kid, you realize there's a lot of problems there, that they've become entrenched in a pattern of behavior, and but you don't write them off, because if you can start to tackle all of those things that drive the behavior, you will affect change. So the first thing is you need good data, really good data on who the most at risk are. Secondly, you need to look at the patterns of behavior that they've got into, and the relationships that are least functioning around them, either in school or at home or the community. Then you need to establish a good relationship with that child. You need to audit their aspirations and motivations and underlying values, and look at the ones that are good for education and the ones that aren't, and start to work on those. You need to work with the peer group around them. So it has to be group work because that, you know, no kid is an island. So you need to be working with all of those. You need to be working with the parents and helping to improve the communication between the school and the parent. And you need to look out at the wider community and that pupil-teacher relationship I was talking about. You know, feeding the teacher with information about the child. Oh, you know, he's got a pet rabbit called Gilbert, or he likes classical music, or whatever, so that he's seen as a human being rather than just colour. And the combination of those things gets results. It changes people, and if you can tap into the aspiration that every young person has, and find things that begin to pique their interest and take them into that direction, they will excel. So everyone has that in them to become excellent at what they want to do, but they don't always have the mechanisms to be able to do that. And so a worker can do that. A worker can key them in to things that are going on that will help them to achieve what they want. So if you like, there needs to be people who go in and do that work with the most vulnerable, but they're also, on the basis of showing schools, different departments in the councils and other workers, look, there's something that you can do that works. They need to start to train and mainstream their workforce to be able to do it. Yeah, so it's a combination of things. And I think there's something very difficult at the moment of working with schools and being academies that literally they may not have to listen to you, but what they will listen to is, I can bring down your exclusion rates. I can increase your achievement levels for groups of kids who are not achieving. And if I show you how to do that, you need to be willing to change and accept any challenges I give you. And it's a partnership, working with you, but kind of against you as well, because we need to change.
Sorry, Simon. You put together a service plan, service plan for Black and Asian minority ethnic young people. and you acknowledge that it's not a panacea, but a starting point in terms of improving service provision for those young people. What prompted you to put together that service plan in the first place?
I think the commission is basically the commission that it's exactly the sort of thing that you're asking for, isn't it? Is what works, and I can tell you right now that will work.
What key recommendations could you give the commission from that service plan that you would want us to take forward?
And on that note, I would have to make this the last question, Winston, so it's a good one to finish on.
Key recommendations are to establish some targets that should be met in terms of race equality and inclusion in the city. To establish some smart targets that can be met in the next couple of years, to involve the community more in that process of delivering the targets, but saying that the council has got a duty of care to these children, that the playing field is not level. There needs to be a duty of care to help the ones who are literally falling through the net. That if we were to meet that duty of care, we would starve gang activity, child exploitation and crime in the city, which would be good for everybody. Even racists would benefit from that. So it's something we've all got to vote for. And saying that it needs a focus, an emergency focus right now. And the only way that you're going to achieve that is to gather up the expertise that you have available, get that into one place, and allow the enthusiasm and expertise of those people to drive the agenda.
On that note, Kevin, can I say your contribution has been insightful, well received and much appreciated. Thank you for attending and giving your written evidence, but also your verbal. Thank you.
Thanks, Winston. Thanks, everybody.
Simon, it's been absolutely fascinating, and it would be great if you could continue to follow and support the commission. And if there's anything else you feel would be useful for us, please don't hesitate to send it through or get in touch.
Will do, Kevin.
I really appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you very much, Simon. So Saeed and Will, you can take yourself off mute if you like. So welcome and welcome back to commissioners and Gull and Sharon, who I haven't spoken to yet, and Sarah. Before we get going, Saeed and Will, and incidentally, I've not met you both before, so I'm just hazarding a guess here that Will is on my. Well, just tell me who is Will and who is Saeed. Will, okay, and okay, right. So before we get going, I'm just handing you over to Adele Robinson, who's just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping for us before I introduce you to colleagues to speak a bit further. So Adele, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, Will and Saeed. I'm just going to take you through a little bit about the commission and what it's about, and a little bit of the housekeeping, as Kevin says. So as you know, the commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of race inequality and racism in Sheffield. The commission was established to focus on 6 key themes: health, education, civic life and communities, business and employment, crime and justice, and sport and culture. And today's the first day of the crime and justice hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there'll be a report prepared and submitted to key stakeholders in Sheffield for action. You've been invited as key witnesses today to share your experiences and to share your insights into the 5 main areas of the Commission. And the 5 areas are racial inequality and racism in Sheffield, which you feel might be of benefit to the Commission. Your knowledge of your own or other approaches to race-related duties or frameworks. Any analysis of the causes of racism or racial inequality within the sector that you're in. Any examples of good practice that you have in relation to reducing racism or racial inequality, and what you believe would be the best way to tackle racism or racial inequality within the city. By appearing as witnesses here today, you're required to act in good faith, and we're assuming that you are doing so by being here. The hearing is being recorded and will be available on the Commission's website afterwards, and so will any non-confidential evidence that you've put forward. Can everyone here today wait for an invitation from the chair before speaking? And can commissioners and invited guests please introduce yourself before speaking? For commissioners, can you put any questions that you have into the chat for me privately, and I'll send them on to the chair. And now can I hand you back to the independent chair, Professor Kevin Hilton. Thanks.
Thank you, Adele, and welcome again, Will and Saeed. Just to let you know that we are expecting one other guest, so we might have a little bit of an interruption at some point. So as independent chair, I'm joined by commissioners, as you can see around me, and as Adele said, we are joined by some members of the public, so I'd like to welcome them as well. Before I invite colleagues to speak with you, Saeed and Will, I wonder if you could just introduce yourselves and the capacity in which you're joining us today. And if you could say a little bit about some of the highlights or the take-homes from your submission, that would be fantastic.
Yes, I'll begin. Thank you, Professor. I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm Saeed Brassab, and I am the Managing Director of Unity Gym Project in Sheffield. And really, just before I go any further, just want to thank you for the opportunity that we have here to be able to give evidence, as well as having had the opportunity to submit evidence. And I mean, in terms of my role, I'm the founder of Unity Gym Project, based in Broomhall, and really a charity that was set up directly as a result to the cuts to youth and family services back in 2010. And I work currently part-time in schools, but I'm a frontline practitioner with a background to youth and community development. And I've worked as a youth worker, frontline practitioner for the past 15 years. And our charity's been here for the last 11 years. But yeah, just really focused around ensuring that young people that we work with and young people from our city are given the opportunities to be able to reach their full potential, really, in spaces that welcomes them and that are non-judgmental. So in a sense, that's what we try and do at Unity Gym. Over to you, Will.
Hi, my name's Will Mason. I'm a volunteer youth worker with Unity Gym Project and a co-coordinator with Saeed. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Sheffield, and that's my day job. So I'm sort of here in a dual role capacity, really, as a member of Unity Gym Project, but also as a researcher based at Sheffield University. And we work collaboratively on a number of sort of youth work and research related projects, and that's really where our evidence submission came from. It's a product of that collaborative process. We've said in our submission that the evidence that we submit is qualitative, but it's not anecdotal. So it comes from over 10 years of working together and having youth work conversations with young people in a variety of different settings, alongside some more formal consultation type activities. And in terms of the headlines from our assessment, we sort of separated our submission into 3 key areas, and those areas are reflective of some of the main conversations and trends that we see in the work that we do with young people. And they're around issues to do with education, to do with policing and to do with the voluntary and community sector more generally. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here, and looking forward to elaborating on some of that as we continue on today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Will and Saeed. Can I just ask Anthony to turn your video on and your audio? I can see an icon there for you. Anthony, can you hear me?
Hello, hello.
Hi, Anthony. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. You've joined us just at the right time. We were just doing a few introductions. Are you okay, Anthony, just to say a bit about yourself? We have a copy of your book.
I hope you enjoyed it.
At least I enjoyed. It's past tense now. You know, I get.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about that and a few other things. But could you say a bit about yourself and a bit about the work that you do? You don't need to go through the whole book, okay? You can just mention the book, but if you just keep it brief, we'll then ask a few questions after that.
Yeah, so I'm Anthony Olasende. People call me Anne for short, and I work with young people around serious youth violence. So it's your knife crime, gun crime, gang culture, CCE, and county lines, that kind of thing. I prefer to go into schools and do like education stuff, workshops, and furthermore, like one-to-one focus groups with young people that have been classed as high risk from their teachers. I also have got knife bins around Sheffield, currently got 5. I've just finalised my last one, which will be 6. I've been out to check them today and I found 4 knives, so that's a positive thing. Someone last week they wanted a nut to sponsor a full knife bin, so I'm adding 2 more additional to the 6 that we've already got, so totaling 8. I've written the book about knife crime, about the effects that it has. Why did I write the book? Because I had a lot of parents, and I work with a lot of young people that have felt the effect of knife crime, and when parents and relatives said to me they didn't think it had happened to them, those words really haunted me. So that was the force behind the book, really. I also do American football with kids 8 to 17 on a Saturday morning. It's not so much the American football what they're there for, it's the engagement and it's the time that we give them. I partnered up with Sheffield Ford, which is an American football team. That's where we get the equipment from. And my role in that is not an actual coach the American football, it's a mindset coach. So we're teaching them skills that they will develop, that they can take up using in life when they're a lot older, but they just don't know it yet. And it's just a great way for parents to bring the kids down. For example, it breaks my heart, but there was a child 10 years old. He had an incident in school where somebody pulled a knife out on him in a toilet while at school. His mum booked him on the American football training, and I talked to him about how he felt, about his feelings, understanding and stuff. And also his older brother came as well, who was wanting revenge. So I managed to talk to the both of them, and they both regularly come. So it's not just me doing the work with the young people, it's a chance for me to talk to the young people through the parents where they find it difficult to do so. Yes.
And thanks a lot for that introduction. I think I'd like to, Gul, if it's okay with you, if you could just introduce yourself, Gul, and then ask your first question of Saeed and Will. So we're just going to have just a change around of the questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Gul Nawaz Hussain QC. I'm Sheffield born and bred. I'm a criminal defence barrister specialising in high-profile crime. born and bred in Sheffield. My practice includes working here, but also up and down the country. And I have the honour of speaking to you both. Firstly, congratulations on the fantastic work that you do. Hello, can Will and Saeed hear me?
Thank you.
For that.
I stunned you into silence with that compliment. But I know time's precious, so I'm going to move on with things. What I'd like you to help me with is this, Will and Saeed. Obviously, youngsters and the police, irrespective of race, there's always issues there, whether it was mods and rockers and punks, whatever the generation, there's always tension between youngsters and the police. From the work that you do with youngsters, what are you seeing that's particularly of concern and emanates from issues of race?
I mean, there are a number of things really in terms of the work that we do, which is holistic really in terms of how we respond to sort of issues around policing. And I think one of the main encounters and one of the main challenges what young people that we work with face is a level of over-policing and continuously being seen as a suspect and made to feel that way, which obviously has an impact in terms of their experience of accessing other services and engaging with sort of services such as the police and others. So there's definitely a wide issue around that. And I mean, last week, for example, just to give you really a brief summary of what an incident last week, we had what I would, as a resident of Broom Hall and someone who works and lives here, an incident which involved roughly, from what I could count, 14 to 15 police cars, a response really that was clearly over proportionate in terms of searching two young individuals in a car, which was a stop and search, and really just from witnessing as a frontline practitioner, attending the scene and asking questions as to why those young people were being stopped and searched, and continuously getting a response to be told that they know why they've been searched, we don't need to explain to you. So there's a sense of obviously over-policing, but also a treatment towards of young people of colour that we work with. But the impact that has on families as well is something we can't walk away from really. So there is issues around that.
Saeed, forgive me for interrupting, but a term that I learned through the course of being part of this commission was intersectionality. So you can have somebody who's BAME, but working class, lives in a particular area. The kinds of incidents that you've just described, do you ascribe them specifically to the race of the individuals that were being spoken to, that was the cause for the issues, or do you think it's some of these other things, and that race either isn't a factor or is just one of many factors?
I'd say it's both really. I mean, race plays a big part in really that, and it's also generations of mistrust, if I'm being honest, because of operations, for example, historically that have happened in communities such as the one that we live in, and again, the constant police presence in an overwhelming really sort of way, which you can't have a conversation really with an officer, even when you're a frontline practitioner trying to de-escalate the situation at a scene such as that.
I mean, just to add to that a little, young people kind of have reported experiences of feeling sort of under surveillance, in particular having photographs taken of them without consent, and these sorts of experiences, they tell us really compound their experience of effectively kind of racialized policing. They experience that as being, because of, at least in part, the way that they look alongside the places that they're from. That's not just young people either, it's local business owners within the community who have experienced police sort of setting up and taking photographs outside of their business, being unable at the time to kind of really give kind of clear reasons as to why that was taking place. So this is kind of reported as quite commonplace amongst the young people who use our services. And what we observe is a kind of almost like a sense of mutual suspicion. So it's as if the police seem constantly suspicious of the young people, and the young people are therefore suspicious of the police. And this creates a sort of circular relationship that's actually then very difficult to break and to create any kind of dialogue from, because, you know, the more suspicious each party presents, the stronger that cycle becomes.
I think you raise a very interesting point there. I'm just looking at your submissions, and a powerful point that you make is the need, this is under the heading of policing, and your proposals for better neighborhood policing teams, and for these to be established in a long-term sense. In Sheffield, we know that safer neighborhood teams, or whatever the term is for them now, have come back, but they were here and then they were discontinued, they were removed. Did you see a deterioration in the link and the relationship between communities and police when those teams disappeared? And if you did, are you seeing it being re-established now that the safer neighborhood teams have come back?
I mean, while they were present, again, I think it's good that they've been brought back in. I think once they disappeared, certainly that disengagement and that level of trust that was being built throughout that time obviously went, which then makes it difficult to engage with. Well, there's no service in place then. But I think since they've come back, obviously the challenge is always kind of the engagement side of it, if I'm being honest, that it feels as though it's us that are having to drive that level of engagement to connect. And what's very difficult with that is often you'd have obviously staff change, but you'll also have, I suppose, again, a level of expectation when we've got limited resources as an organisation to be continuing to do that work that needs to be done, which also has an effect on obviously things being reported and action being taken when, for example, there's serious incidents in the area, for example. So there are, we have seen the benefits, and when they weren't here and dispersed, obviously the challenge of meeting those community needs only got wider, really. But I do think it's something that we feel more needs to be done, because it's often relied on us having to do that engagement and that reaching out, really, when it should be a mutual and a long-term sort of collaboration, really, to address the needs of the community.
Saeed, Will, when I've had discussions on this very topic with other people, the perception that I've formed is that people in communities like the ones that we live in can often see the police as only turning up when something bad is happening. And that many of the issues that you've identified can be addressed by having a police presence which is more casual, in the sense of there when nothing's happening, walking around, interacting with shopkeepers, with people on the street. It helps to, from my perspective, I think that would perhaps help foster links. People can feel more relaxed in mentioning things. Is that kind of approach to community policing, sort of being there as a regular presence, not in direct response to an issue, do you think that would help address the kinds of issues that you've just mentioned?
Oh, clearly. And again, I think it's been a fundamental issue for us as an organisation, but also as residents, that it's quite often reactionary. There's very little that's preventative in terms of building on that trust, that engagement and that presence. And often what we've had, when we've certainly felt the level of over-policing in our communities, officers that are not patched in that local area, coming from outside, at times outside the city, coming into the area and not having those, really kind of taking us back a bit in terms of those small steps that we've taken to build trust, because of the manner and the way they come in and conduct their style of policing. Regularly, just even within that sort of incident that we had last week, I mean, I was having an open conversation about the approach of some officers. We do need police presence, but I was clearly telling them we don't need that level of, we don't need that style of policing from officers like yourself that was present, because it's not going to help to build any trust, and certainly not going to give any confidence for people to report any issues. So I think it has its place, but I think it's important to recognise that, you know, we need that consistency.
There are probably one or two complexities that are also worth raising. So, you know, I agree with everything that's been said, but there is also an issue around police not turning up when something bad is happening. So there have been instances within the community where a kind of acute instance has happened, which has required a response kind of almost immediately, and that response has been very slow or very late, and therefore kind of help wasn't there as quickly as one might have hoped. And then in terms of the issue around visibility, there's kind of an assumption, particularly within the context, I think, of youth services, that you can solve an issue of trust by just showing up. But I think that in some respects that slightly underestimates how deep-rooted some of these kind of scars now lie, and it isn't necessarily always helpful for a police presence to just kind of arrive, particularly unannounced, within a youth service where relationships of trust have been built around an assumption of confidentiality within the relationship between youth workers and young people. So whilst I think that the road towards those sorts of relationships is potentially productive, it isn't always straightforward. And, you know, sometimes it's necessary for youth workers, for example, to organise that with officers in advance so that they can give young people notice about the fact that something like that might happen. Young people can then perhaps prepare questions that they'd like to ask officers. And that's slightly different from just sort of arriving unannounced, you know, at random.
Yeah. And again, it's, you know, I think it's deemed as a quick answer, but to us and to the young people that we work with, to build some of that trust and to be seen and to be doing the work, you know, there's opportunities for that to happen if you resource some of the work that organisations are doing, for example. I think invest in it and let young people actually see that, you know, you're doing more than just being present. And I think, you know, we've had opportunities where we've been, for example, instructed to put funding bids in and have the funding bids rejected, you know, when we've been invited to put a bid in. And so there are other solutions what we feel can build some of those sort of long-standing issues to overcome some of those barriers, rather than the constant present being seen as an immediate and a simple answer.
Before I ask you this question, gentlemen, I want to make clear that I perceive the work that you do as very much facilitating interaction between youngsters and the police. So my question isn't targeted at you. Historically, though, in Sheffield, there has been a tendency for the police to work through gatekeepers, or sometimes they're referred to as community leaders. And unless things happen through these individuals, there's either an absence of communication or certainly there's an absence of activity. Do you think that has changed now? Or do you think that the police's approach to community policing is still very much focused on trying to find gatekeepers rather than perhaps direct engagement or engagement with organizations that have a grassroots influence like yours does?
I mean, I think some of that still exists, if I'm being honest. You know, we've been around for over a decade, and certainly we're not new to the work that we do, and I certainly deemed as a good practice in terms of what we do. But what I would say is definitely there's been a very slow shift to improve that engagement, or to kind of go away from being in a position of doing things as they've always been done, rather than seeing actually the impact and the differences that organisations like ourselves are making. And there are some wonderful organisations in the city like us, but more importantly, I think that shift of doing things differently has been a slow progress. which affects the, for us to build those relationships, because, it's got to be mutual and it's got to be genuine in order for us to tackle the issues that we're facing in the city. And if you're not being heard and if you've not been approached, then it makes it far more difficult to see, that level of engagement improving and coexisting in a way that we can have a meaningful change for young people, really.
I suppose an example that might just illustrate that a little bit is that it often feels like the impetus for engagement to get a conversation started around an issue, for example, falls upon, small organisations like ourselves. And for me, that illustrates that perhaps the engagement hasn't been particularly forthright from other organisations, like the police. If it's down to a largely volunteer-led organisation to kind of make that initial, to reach out with that initial email or that phone call, to organise the Zoom meeting that brings a few people round the table from different organisations, work that has to be done on top of, an extensive amount of community development work that's already happening, then that perhaps suggests that more could be done by other organisations as well as those from the voluntary community sector to open up those kinds of dialogue.
Cool. There's also something in there for me about sort of the continued undermining of trust, and we've got to shift away from that. I think there's a pattern which I certainly see and I've seen over the years, that for organisations to be heard and to be listened and to be taken on board, there's still a level of mistrust, which I find it hard to understand really at times, because I think, if we're going to move forward, then there's got to be spaces and there's got to be conversations that we might not want to have, but we need to have, because for generations, communities like ours have been failed. So I think that's really important.
Cool. Can I just take a moment to bring Ant in? I can't seem to see him on the board, on the screen. Secretariat, could you just check to see where Ant is?
Yeah, he disappeared a few minutes ago.
May I ask a question of Will and Saeed whilst we try and get Anthony back just to you?
Yes, please do.
Will, Saeed, you mentioned the words mutual and genuine in terms of interaction. I just want to look at the flip side of the interaction with the police now, because I think you've set out in quite some detail the issues as you see them. In terms of your interaction with the youth that you're working with, though, just so that we have a full picture, so that we can answer questions as they may arise further in our inquiries, what message are you sending to them in terms of the police? Because, for example, whilst I only defend, I make clear when I speak to people, well, I don't have a separate telephone number to ring when I'm in trouble. It's still 999, even though I'm a criminal defence practitioner. And the police as an institution are there to serve us. So in terms of the sort of fundamental civic principles that underpin our society, are those ones that you impress upon the youth that you work with, irrespective of the difficulties that you encounter on a day-to-day basis? And if you do, how well does that go down and what challenges do you encounter? And I appreciate some of that will be the answers you've already given.
Thank you for raising that question. It's one which, again, in terms of really the cohort and the young people and the wider community that we're based and work in, I'd say it's something we advocate for. But what does make it very difficult, I think, for young people particularly, is the challenges when it's a constant issue of being made to feel that they're a constant suspect, and treated in a really inhuman place. I mean, like just the last incident I sort of last week that I was, present because I was called upon, and as there was huge concerns about the level of police presence. When I turned up to that, and I'm as a practitioner trying to have a dialogue with officers present, and you see the level of unprofessional conduct that and the manner in how you're treated, and young people and the community see that, it does make it difficult to bridge that gap further so that there's an understanding that we're all trying to, work collaboratively together. So I think sometimes the challenge is really made difficult by the way officers conduct themselves, especially when young people are present. But we've always tried to lead by example, you know. And again, having been present in that incident last week, which I must say, as someone who's lived in the community since 1993, was probably one of the most horrific incidents that I've witnessed, because, you know, because of the impact of what went on. Simply to search two young people that were driving a vehicle, and just no follow-up really as to why there was that level of police presence and why it was conducted in the manner that it was. And again, young people wanting to complain about officers, but not being given the channels to do so. So it does make it difficult, I must admit. It does put you in a position where you're made to feel undermined, even when you're trying to bridge that gap. But we've always tried to advocate and model and ensure that young people particularly are given the best opportunity to be able to know what their rights are, and whether they're stopped and searched, and to be given a receipt, for example. I mean, the young person who was stopped and searched last week wasn't given a receipt. When I asked the question as to why he was being stopped and searched, I was told he knows why he's being stopped and searched. I don't need to explain anything to you. I'm asking the young person, ask the officer why he stopped and searched you, because he needs to explain that to you. And again, it's that sort of challenge that you're having to deal with, which does make it difficult. All it would have took is a conversation. And I think those are some of the challenges that we deal with, to try and model and to ensure young people from our community are really equipped to ask the questions, but to also cooperate, which they do, and I'm really proud of them for doing so.
Yeah, in terms of the values that we, speak to young people about, their values of responsibility, of discipline, of civic engagement, of proper respectful conduct with anybody that they come across. But just as Saeed said, we also speak to young people about their rights. We've hosted opportunities within our space where members of the police have come to talk to young people and have some of those difficult conversations. We've heard about, in principle, the procedures for complaints, and the systems that are in place, but we also know that in practice, as Saeed's just explained, that sometimes the right information isn't offered, and those instances really undermine those conversations where young people are told about the principles and practices of complaints procedures and of proper conduct.
Thank you very much, Will, Saeed, and Gul. We'll come back to you, but I'd just like to bring Ant in to see if he can say a bit more about some of his collaborative work with the police. Ant, are you there? Can I get your audio on and your video?
Yes.
I know you've had a few issues with the technology, but you're with us.
Yeah.
You're with us
Can
now.
you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you. Are you?
I don't know what's happening with my video at the minute. It's on my phone. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, can I just ask you a question, maybe whilst that's being sorted out?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Brilliant. And can you just for anyone who hasn't read your book, One Knife, Many Lives, could you just give us a very brief summary of the book before I then ask you some questions about it?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, it's about a young boy that decides to make a poor decision, and obviously it's something to do with a knife. And then it goes on to look at the impact of knife crime from different angles. So there's obviously his angle, and there's his mom's, there's his partners, there's his friends, his communities, and how it devastates each of them in different ways. And also in that, it covers domestic abuse as well, substance misuse, and the issues around mental health and knife crime.
Yeah. Thanks, Anne. And your book illustrates how an intelligent young man can believe ideas of carrying a weapon for protection. And this is the sort of thing that came up in the NACRO report as well, isn't it? And it's this that inevitably leads to his own demise. And by the way, everyone, these aren't plot spoilers. Okay, you can still read the book and get a lot out of it. So why do these stories persist in Sheffield in regards to the need to carry weapons, and is there an environment of fear amongst
Yeah,
young people?
definitely. That's the main drive. What I found working with the young people and talking to them, you know, it's not a case of them and being straight and honest with me straight away. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 sessions until they come out, but it always comes down to, well, not always, 95% of the time it comes down to they're just scared. They're led to believe that other young people are carrying knives, therefore they need to protect their life, and that's when things are getting out of hand, because you've got, you know, it's how your brain works. If you think something's happening, your brain will start to believe it's happening, and they're getting into arguments and disagreements, and they're feeling that, okay, then I'm going to pull the knife out first before this person. And unfortunately, what the young people don't realize is that a knife is a weapon at the end of the day, and you can't just go around flinging around weapons protecting yourself. They're very dangerous. And unfortunately, quite a few young people have to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, yeah, and in the police report on knife crime, and they said that key locations for knife crime offences in Sheffield occur in Burngreave, the town centre, and Highfields. What can you tell us about these areas, or areas like these, as the setting for such offences?
Okay. Do you know what's crazy? Those 3 areas are so different. It's unbelievable.
Right.
So you've got Burngreave, very multicultural. I'll say there's not many white people there. Is it High Green? Did you say?
Highfields.
Highfield. I don't even know where that is.
Okay. Okay.
Where's it near?
And the town centre.
Oh, definitely town centre.
Yeah,
Like, you've got a mix of people in the town centre. I'm guessing Highfield will be up like the Westfield way. Again, up that area is predominantly white people. So I can't see. I don't know how they've. Well, obviously they've come up with the stats for it, but with the work that I do, I wouldn't say there's any hotspot at the minute. Unfortunately, you know, if there was, we'd be able to contain it. But there's not. It's just young people in general.
So young people across Sheffield.
Across Sheffield, I've been to most parts of Sheffield, and it's exactly the same. Some I don't even have sessions to. I'll just pull up and see a group of young kids, and I'll talk to them, and I'll ask the feelings around knife crime and you know, serious violence, and it's all the same no matter which part of Sheffield that I'm going to.
Right. Okay. All right. In the Sheffield Knife Strategy for 2018 to 21, it states that through Operation Fortify, I don't know if you know about that, the South Yorkshire Police cannot deal with the problem of knife crime by itself, and it's working collaboratively across the public sector alongside partners in the private, voluntary, and third sector. What's your view on how the police are working with partners to deal with knife crime?
I'm waiting to see any evidence of this happening, to be honest. I've seen a lot of box ticking going on. You know, it looks good on paper, but I'm not seeing much change with the young people, unfortunately. I don't know many people that they've partnered with that's made a big change, to be honest. I think it's a bit, from what I found, it's very much a sense of they just want to give people money to deal with the issue, and they themselves don't want to take any responsibility in making it better unless they get 100% credibility for it.
Okay, so what's the box ticking that you're talking about?
That comment that you just said to me previously, that's box ticking, because everyone's like, yeah, that sounds really good. The box is ticked, but who's following it up? Right. Well, someone's not, because you're having to ask me. You get what I mean? Yeah.
And which organisations or individuals are receiving funding to deal with these issues? You said that the police are willing to give money to people to kind of almost absolve themselves of responsibility. So who?
I don't know offhand. I know there's quite a few that have received money from the police, and that's another thing. I honestly don't think it's enough. They don't get enough to, you know the scale of the problem. We understand that, and the money that they are giving them, it's not enough. It's not enough for them to combat this big issue.
They talk about a need for early intervention, which is what you're doing. I think going into schools and talking with young people. Are you also saying that you don't see this early intervention work happening?
I've not seen any. I try and ask. I try and get involved. I try and work with the police. It's just not happened yet. Well, it was yesterday I got told of an instance where the police went into a school and started showing pictures of people being murdered, and the children were upset crying. You know, that's the first time I've heard of the police actually going in to do these talks. But I am aware that they do get the PCSOs in to do little talks and stuff. But you know, it's back to that. I don't think people or the communities have got that respect for the police that they used to have. They see them more as, like got mentioned earlier, they only come when something bad happens, and there's a very negative emotion around the police. So by them themselves doing that kind of like early intervention and prevention work, I don't think that the young people, they don't take them seriously. They just, you know, who's this guy talking to me? Like he's not, his job's not there to prevent it. His job's to come and arrest me when I've done it, kind of thing.
Right. I feel like there's something we're not seeing in terms of the processes at play affecting young people in Sheffield. You know, the BAME, Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic population of Sheffield is around 19%, at least with the last census, compared to 47% of the knife crime offenders. So what is it we're not understanding in regards to knife crime, race and racism? To be honest, every report that I've read, it's not the BAME people that are the ones with the knives and getting in trouble with the violent crimes. I don't know. Is that what you were saying with that report that you found? Yeah. Well, the statistics are saying that there's a disproportionality in terms of ethnicity and knife crime offenders. But let's, if you like, let's speak more broadly, because I'm guessing that you're working with all young people in schools and so on. So are you not detecting? Because there was a definite focus on ethnicity in your book, wasn't there? In terms of the or was there? Was there? Or did I read that into it?
You're right. You see.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's yeah. That's,
you presume that it's ethnic. There's not so. See through the entire book. Now the book's quite slim. Why? Because I didn't go into no detail on no one's description, because I automatically knew people are going to see this young boy as a black boy. He's not a black, it's to prove a point that people are, the reason why people feel that there's such big issue with black people and BAME people and knife crime is because that perception's been drilled into your head through the media, through social media. It's not true. People that read my book will automatically say that that is a young black man in that book. I never once mentioned anybody's colour in that book on purpose.
And that's a good point. Though I think from my point of view, it's turning into a bit of a book review, this one, isn't it? But from my point of view, it was more the use of patois, you know, and slang that hints at those things rather than you actually saying it. Yeah, do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
so I hear what you are saying. But there is an issue there. If there is such a in terms of Sheffield, I mean, let's come away from your book for a second.
Yeah.
There is an issue there. If there is such a disproportionality in the number of Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic people in Sheffield, and the number of offenders who are who fall under that category of BAME.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that has been explored in terms of understanding why that is the case.
I've not done it. I've not got the time to do it, unfortunately. I'd love to, but it's one of those things, you know, if you look hard enough for something, you'll find it. If you're black and you're searched, I don't know what the latest stat was last time. I know it was 5 times more, 3 times more. If you're looking for something, you're going to find it. If they're looking to find black people with something on them or BAME people with something on it, those kind of ratios prove to you that that's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean that's an age-old thing around stop and search. You know, the more you search a particular population, the more likely you are to find things within that particular population. But the stats do say you're 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're from a black population, and I think it's a little less if it's more broadly BAME.
Why is this? Why is this? Do we know why?
Well, this is you know, one of the reasons behind our crime and justice hearings. So hopefully,
is it okay to just come in with a kind of quick suggestion here?
Well, sure. Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. Just with respect to the kind of question of disproportionality.
Yes.
There's a really important demographic issue to consider here, which comes back to reference to intersectionality that was made earlier. And this is that people from minoritized ethnic groups are much more likely to be living in areas of concentrated deprivation. Yes. That's not just in the city, that's nationally and you know, internationally as well. And if you look at the research around violence, poverty is always a key driver. So where you see deprivation and all of the associated intersectional issues, you're more likely to see violence. Yeah. So when you talk about disproportionality, there's a tendency to try and answer the race question, but actually the poverty question is a really important question here. And that's a much more consistent key driver. So it's not a full answer to the question, but I think it is a really important sort of pattern that needs to be considered in this discussion. It's disproportionately black and minority ethnic groups who are living in the most deprived parts of the city with the least access to services and the associated sort of intersectional social problems, which are almost always connected to violence.
Yeah, and to be fair, that is discussed in the knife strategy as well, the Sheffield knife strategy by the police. So that is a really good point. Can I just bring Jonathan in to ask a question? You're on mute, Jonathan.
Sorry, I thought you could hear me. I was asking half the question while I was sat here. Guys, listen, thanks for coming. It's been really good listening to you guys, and I know some of the work that you do around the city. But I don't know so much. Will, are you from Sheffield, born and bred?
No, Jonathan, I'm from Melton Mowbray originally. I moved to Sheffield in 2005.
Okay, no worries. No, I'm not excluding you anyway. But I know probably both Saeed and I know Anthony, you guys, you've seen generations of in the areas and things change. This is a question for you both. Looking at sort of situation amongst young people and violent crimes within sort of early 2000s, even the 90s and up until sort of mid 2000s, and comparing it to the situation across the city of Sheffield with young people today, do you think the situation's got worse? Do you think it's kind of just the same as it was before, or do you think it's getting better in any sort of way? So I'll ask that to Will and Saeed first.
Yeah, Jonathan, good to see you, and glad you're involved in the commission. I mean, in terms of really the scale and the landscape of what we've seen over the years, I would definitely say it's obviously got worse. And I think there've been a lot of positives. I mean, we were set up as a direct result of cuts to youth services and family services, purely because we realised in our community that, you know, services were gone, and if we didn't respond in a way that was supportive and responding to the young people that's in our community in a meaningful way, that we can bring about a difference to their lives and to their families, it would have been really worse than what it is. I think with the question you asked, it's also important to recognise the values of people like ourselves, you and others who've been through that youth work journey, and recognising actually that we needed to respond. And if we didn't, then it was only going to get worse. The difficulty we faced through that journey of responding is the lack of recognition in terms of the work that's been done to address, you know, to respond and to address those needs of young people in those communities that have very limited services, and that have young people and communities that don't engage with mainstream services. So where our response has been one that caters for that. And, you know, if we're not open, and we've had an experience of not being open during the COVID, it will only get worse. So I would say it's got worse as a result of not having the services and the resources to be adequately responding to the needs of young people, particularly as the vulnerability of those young people have got wider and wider, and the gaps increased. It has been a challenge, but I think more importantly, I'd say, you know, there's been positives such as the work that we've done, which again has been highlighted as a good practice. The difficulty with that is, you know, it's an issue of, as a city, there's been a lack of acknowledgement and investment to invest in what works and what makes a difference. And, you know, I remember going back in 2011-12 when we had the riots after the murder of, in London of, what was it? The shooting, and there was riots across the country. And Sheffield, thankfully, wasn't involved in that. But at that particular night, we were open till 1 a.m. We knew that it was happening in Manchester. We knew it was coming close. And as a result, we ensured that our services were open, our doors were open to support young people to not get involved. I mean, I remember at the time the youth club was open, and we had young people watching on YouTube riots taken across the country. And sometimes, and after that, I mean, the reason why I'm bringing up that story is when that was done, there was a peer review that took place in Sheffield, where the Home Office came in and looked at what was done to tackle some of those issues, to ensure that why Sheffield wasn't a city that, you know, riots didn't take place. And the Home Office advisors, representatives that came, visited our services, spoke to the young people that we work with, went across the city, and was really taken back by the impact that we have as an organisation. And I say that knowing that as an organisation, the core principles of what we do is really centred to good youth work principles. And we've tailored that, and we've done that from the offset. And that's really helped us over the years. But in response to really the work that we do, the challenge has been, you know, that the representatives, the home advisors that came in, they could see that. They could see the model that we built, the fundamentals, the principles that we work towards is something that if they took it and put it in Brixton, I remember one of them saying, it was Mark Duggan, yeah, thank you for that, Bashir, for that. If they took it to Brixton, it will work because it was developed, it was put together by people that young people could relate to with experience and from the community. So there's really importance with that. But the difficulty we see is really that as a city, we've not acknowledged in parts of the city, organisations like ours and others that are making a difference and haven't been adequately resourced to continue to do that work. And that's really important to us.
Yeah.
Just a very quick addition. I mean, unfortunately, in the kind of 10, 11 years that I've been volunteering as a youth worker, violence has always been present. You know, we've seen issues throughout that time frame. But you know, the data and kind of our anecdotal experiences do suggest that things are kind of increasing in that respect. What's of course coming with that is, you know, a lot of media attention and a kind of focus around violence prevention or solving the problem of violence. One of the potential dangers there is that this is a systemic issue. It's a long-standing issue. It's complexly interconnected with all of these other kind of issues around race, around social inequalities. So a quick solve is not going to be forthcoming. And the solutions that need to be developed have to have that built in place. Our focus is really around kind of reframing that around creating safety. So instead of just thinking about how to solve a problem like violence, how do you create safety? And creating safety is an ongoing endeavor. It's something that has to be continuously revised and worked upon. And that requires long-term sustaining solutions. It requires sustainable funding sources, just like Anthony was making reference to, requires partnership working. So creating safety is an ongoing thing that we can all kind of work towards. Solving violence in a period of sort of 6 months or a funding period of 10 months is a very different question.
Yeah.
I think the other thing which we do tend to miss out on is, particularly for those young people that have been affected by violence and communities, is this, you know, the solutions that we offer doesn't include healing. And what I mean by that is, you know, the trauma that comes from being a victim of a violence is wide. You know, it has ripple effects. And I think what we do also need to look at is how we try and put measures to ensure that young people are receiving, you know, the counselling, the trauma, you know, support, but more importantly, that as a solution, we have healing, not just punishment within our response to violence.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Just same question to Anthony. Come in with it. Same questions to Anthony.
Yeah.
You want me to repeat the question?
It's got a lot worse. Yeah, no, I can just about remember it. Yeah, I think over time.
Oh, he's broke up.
He's on his phone, so I think he might be just coming in and out of his signal.
It's got a lot worse.
He's back.
I wish we were able to do anything. Once something as much. Hello, can you hear me?
You cut out then. Do you want to just quickly repeat that again? Because you
Yeah. Can you still hear me now?
Yeah.
So basically, it's like anything. Once you've got something good, you take the bad bits for granted. You know, so those years ago, there was a lot of money around young people. They were safe. Everything was all right. Because the services were so good, it becomes sort of a target to reduce the money. And, you know, unfortunately, the money gets reduced until we're at a position where we are now. I mean, you know, the severity and the violence that these young people are doing is, you know, is almost barbaric. I'm struggling to understand the mindset and what's missing. You know, what have these young people of today missed what my generation, what generations before have had? And it just goes to show that it's not, you know, I found that it's not the knife is not the issue, the violence is not the issue, it's the mindset what's the issue, it's the underlying things that is the big issue. Because, you know, if you put a gun in somebody's hand that's willing to stab somebody, they'll shoot them. If you put acid in someone's hand that's got a knife, they're willing to throw the acid. So it's not so much, you know, the end product that we need to focus on. We need to start focusing on these core things, and these things need to be seen as an investment. Because if you focus on the core things, other things will improve, such as confidence, which will help you get a job when you're older, such as those kind of skills that we need to, you know, give to the young people to help them develop and not just focus on, you know, the end result all the time. You know, I strongly feel resources and money can get put better focusing on the main things like the mindset and things like that.
Yeah.
And Anthony, it's Kevin here. Why is gang membership so significant in local stories of knife crime?
I think that gang membership is, you know, it is what it is. is ongoing. It's not changed. It's been around for decades. And I've not seen a strong link between knife crime and gangs. I'm just waiting to see the stats around it. But a lot of the young people involved in knife crime are just scared young people that are just trying to defend themselves, going on day-to-day life.
Yeah. I think you are right. I think gang crime, I think the police make a link with knife crime and gangs because the offences tend to be more violent where gangs are concerned. I think you're right about the numbers. I think it's the level of the violence that
we're pushing a false narrative. So that with that narrative strongly, linking knife crime to gang culture and black people, what does that mean? It means that if you're not black and you're not in a gang, that means your child won't get stabbed. This is false. This is far from the truth.
No, I didn't say race. No, Anthony, I didn't say race. I said gangs and knife crime.
Well, from what I see, every time there's a picture of a gang on social media, it just so happens to be, a group of black youths. I know you didn't say that. That's what I'm saying. Sorry for that. Okay. But that is the issue that I'm dealing with now. I'm trying to spread awareness on such a dangerous topic. However, a lot of people are switched off because they've been led to believe that their child is not at risk. And it's not until their child gets stabbed or killed or gets a knife pulled out on them that it comes close to home. But sometimes that's a bit too late,
Yeah. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about about the knife bins, and then anything you might know about the kind of knife amnesties?
So the knife bins. I had a knife bin about 3 or 4 years ago. It was in Burngreave. I got that because there was another weapons bin, but when I asked the people to use it, it was a bit hostile, so I got my own. Therefore, I could tell people where the knives were going, that I was collecting them, that were safe, etc., etc. It went really well. I was getting 1 to 2 knives per month. And then I decided, look, this worked well. I want to spread it out amongst Sheffield. So I did a fundraiser. Local businesses then donated to a raffle. As I said, we did a GoFundMe. I funded it I didn't. I can't take claim for this. It was us as a community. We raised £3,000, enough for 5 weapon amnesty bins to go around Sheffield, plus the one that I already had. And they're working. I don't. A lot of the feedback I get from them is, we don't want this knife bin in our area because other people are going to think that, we've got a problem with knife crime. Now that's the same mentality that's got killing young people, because young people think that other young people have got a knife, therefore they're carrying a knife. So I'd like for people to try and get away from that sort of mentality. But the weapons business, honestly, they're working. I've just been today. I checked all 5, and out of 5, I've got 3 weapons. The total time while I've been doing it, nearly 3.5, 4 years now, I've collected 250 knives. So it does work, and it's an option. The weapons bin is an option that's not there. You can't safely get rid of a weapon without going to the police, and they only hold amnesties on certain days. So the bins aren't just bins, they're options for young people to use and for people to use that need to get rid of any weapons. And I swear by them because they've worked for me, and I'll continue to buy them.
Are you still there, Ant?
Develop it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with the
I'm still here.
in the NACRO, I think it's Knives Not Lives report. They said that some people thought that knife bins were of limited value. I'm sure you've heard this, because people can get hold of them so easily.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. If you can get 250 knives off the street, I mean that's fantastic work. Fantastic work. What do you think of some of the other schemes where people have swapped knives for, I don't know, for vouchers or what have you? And have you heard about that?
Yeah. The guy in London does it for JD voucher. Why not? Why not do it until you know what is? Unfortunately, we're at a stage where we don't actually know what's working. So if it's working for him, let continue to do so until someone comes up with a better idea. Then we've got to roll with what we've got. Don't forget, he's in a very much position the same position as me. Like, I don't work with the police don't work with me on this. I put my life at risk every time I go and collect a knife off a young person, every time I empty my weapons bins. You know, I've got kids and stuff, but I put that aside for other young people because I don't want them to, you know, get injured by a knife or take somebody's life. You know, it's a very, very deep thing. The more you think about it, it's not like I'm the police and I've got protection. If someone decides to stab me up, I'm finished. But for me, it's worth it because I want to make a difference to these young people.
Yeah. So how can we get to a point of knowing what's working? How can we
trial and error and stats? That's all we can do.
Can I throw that one over to Said and Will as well? How do we get to a point of knowing what's working? And I know that Will, as a researcher, should be able to come.
There's a variety of different ways to think about that, I think. I mean, the kind of obvious example, the obvious example from a research perspective is evaluation. But I also think that we need to think kind of critically and creatively about what counts as evidence. So, you know, there's a tendency within evaluations to prioritize quantitative approaches, what are called randomized controlled trials, which give you a particular kind of evidence, but they're often very difficult to administer. And the kind of work that we're talking about, youth work that's very relational, is also something that's very difficult to quantify. So the sorts of interventions that we're describing today, voluntary and community sector organisations, really don't lend themselves to those kinds of evaluations. So you have this sort of black box whereby you've got organisations who we sort of know anecdotally have very, very close relationships with young people and families, who are reported as being very kind of successful in terms of their approach and the work they do, but quantifying the kind of the impact, quote unquote, of those organisations is something that's difficult to do. Now, that's only a real problem if you discount the voices of young people and families as evidence. So if you say we're only interested in statistics, then what you discount is the quality of kind of narratives of what it is that people who engage with services say about the value of those services. If you accept that that's part of the evidence base, broadly speaking, that you're interested in, then that opens up a whole bunch of different ways to kind of assess the value of what it is that people are doing. That means working qualitatively, it means working with people. Often it means working in a participatory way with people who deliver, but also use services to capture what it is about the essence of that service that's important to a community. And I think we could be doing more of that actually, alongside the kind of standard randomized control type, you know, evidence that you see in what works centers, for example. I don't know if you want to come and say.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just echoing that. I think it's moving with times as well, just the shift when we look at sort of the violence that we see and the different types of violence. I think it's important we recognize what works, what's responsive, what's kind of responding to that trend that's currently going. Because I mean, with sort of weapons, for example, they've changed as time has gone on. It's dramatically changed in what people use to attack others. So it's important, I think, that we begin to recognize really how that's evolved and how we're responding to that in a really different way as you know, across the city. So there is a place in terms of what the solutions are and what the response is, but it's different for every community. But I think what we can't go away from is, for those of us that have those relationships and those trusting relationships to engage with those young people, it makes a huge difference. I mean, we've had young people, you know, that we're aware because of how embedded we are within the community and the conflict that we know that's either to take place or that's about to happen, that we've intervened and we've taken weapons off them and handed them to police or destroyed them or put them in bin boxes. So it's important to recognize really the value of that as well, because if that's missed out of really the solution, then it makes it difficult to know what's happening, because there's times where by the time the police have arrived, you know, it's often too late. You know, and I think that's really important.
I think to really kind of to just really kind of simplify the point I was trying to make as well, it's about listening to communities, but really listening and creating spaces where that kind of dialogue can take place. but is also taken seriously and taken on board. You know, we have people in the city, you know, Ant's a good example, who are speaking to multiple young people all the time, gathering really complex and detailed stories about their experiences, about their mindset. You know, it's not just Unity Gym, there are a number of different organizations who are working very closely with young people and families and having conversations that actually lots of researchers would really struggle to have. That's important information. It needs to be a part of the solution. So that's a part of understanding what works for me.
Yes, Will, and that black box idea. I mean, it's dangerously close to realist evaluation type approaches. Is that what you were hinting at?
Yeah, I think it's just that the kind of dominant methodologies that sort of tend to inform policy decisions. Yeah, they struggle to account for the more qualitative aspects of this work, and that's fundamentally a part of what this work is. You know, it is relational. Yes.
Will, Said, and Ant, we've just gone past quarter past the hour, and unfortunately we have to draw this session to a close. I think there's more for us to talk about, but unfortunately not today. So hopefully you'll be the three of you. Hopefully you'll be open to further contact down the line. Are you open to that?
Yes,
that would be really, really good. And is Ant still with us? I can't see him. But Ant, wherever you are, we'd like to thank you as well for your time with us today. Will and Said, keep up the great work in the community as well. We appreciate it, really do. And please continue supporting the Race Equality Commission and staying in dialogue with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us, and you know, we're pleased something like this has been set up, to be honest, and we're happy to contribute, because I think with the challenges that we're all facing, it's important that the levels of inequality that our city and the young people we work with and families are addressed in a really meaningful and meaningful way. So we're happy to contribute and look forward to speaking to you whenever.
Thank you, Said.
And thanks everybody.
Yes, thanks, Will. Much appreciated. We'll see you another time. Andy, hi. Kevin Hilton here. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Hello, Dawn.
Hi, Kevin. Nice to see you.
Yes, good to see you again. Yeah. Dawn, you're joined by Maxine. Yeah. And another person. Or Andy, are you being joined with someone else?
I'm not. My manager unfortunately arrived at the last minute.
Sorry, Andy. What was that?
It's Kevin. It's Kadra Shield, who's criminal exploitation project manager, who's
Sorry, you froze there, Bashir. We didn't hear that.
Yeah, it was she's the criminal exploitation project manager, and just recently get back in.
And is she joining as the discussant, or with Andy or Dawn?
As a discussant.
Okay. All right, thank you. Maxine, hi. Do you have some audio and video?
Okay, that should view audio, has it?
We can hear you, Maxine, but we can't see you yet.
Right, not sure why that is. I'm looking, sorry, but good afternoon.
Okay, Maxine, we'll plough on.
Okay.
So just whilst you're trying to sort out any video, and Dawn and Andy, we're going to go through a few preliminaries before we begin. So Adele, could you just do some of the introductory?
I will. I'm just letting Cadra in. There we go. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to take you through a little bit about the Commissioner's context before we begin. So, as you know, the Commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of race inequality and racism in Sheffield. The Commission was established to focus on 6 key themes: education, health, civic life and communities, business and employment, crime and justice, and sport and culture. And today's the first day of the crime and justice hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there'll be a final report produced and submitted for action to the key stakeholders in Sheffield. You have been asked here as key witnesses today to share your insights into the areas of the terms of reference of the Race Equality Commission. And those 5 key areas are racial inequality and racism in Sheffield that you think may be of benefit to and for of use to the Commission, knowledge of your own or other approaches to race-related duties or frameworks, any analysis of the causes of racism or racial inequality within your sector, any examples of good practice in relation to reducing racism or racial inequality, and what you believe would be the best ways to tackle racism and racial inequality within the city. As witnesses, you're required to act in good faith, and by appearing here, we're assuming that you're doing so. Can you also please note the hearing has been recorded and it will be available on the Commission's website afterwards, and any non-confidential material and evidence that you've submitted will also go on the website. Can those in attendance wait for an invitation from the chair before speaking, and can witnesses and invited guests and commissioners introduce yourself before speaking? Can any commissioners who have questions please put those in the chat to me privately, and I'll send them on to the chair. And now can I hand you back to the independent chair, Professor Kevin Hilton. Thank you.
Thanks, Adele, and welcome to Maxine, Dawn, Andy and Cadra. So Dawn and Maxine are speaking from the same perspective. Cadra has been invited. Cadra, it's good to meet you. You can all take your mute off.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Cadra, it would be great if, you know, as we're talking, you could perhaps share your experience. But shortly I'll be asking you to introduce yourself, and Andy, welcome as well. You can see around you that I'm the independent chair, and I'm joined by commissioners from the Sheffield Race Equality Commission. And in today's hearing around crime and justice, we've asked you to focus on your own submissions in the case of Andy and Dawn and Max, and for Cadra really to reflect upon some of the things that are being spoken about today. So before I invite colleagues to speak with you, I wonder if you could say a bit about yourself, just briefly, especially as there's 4 of you, because I know that we could spend the hour just talking about each of you individually, but just briefly introduce yourself and the capacity in which you're attending today, and if you could say a little bit about your evidence for today's hearing, that would be very helpful. So how about Dawn first?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Dawn Shaw. I'm the Director of Communities for Sheffield City Council. I'm here today with Maxine Stavrianakos to go through the submission that we presented on community safety. Community safety now historically sat in the housing service and has recently moved into the communities service, primarily to make the links, or better links, with our communities and with the other services and community partners that we have, because the communities service links in with many of our different partners. Maxine is the head of service, and she'll introduce herself, and she's going to take you through a little bit of an overview of the submission that we've sent in, if that is okay with everyone. Yeah. And then when she's done that, obviously we'll move on as directed by yourself, Chair.
Thanks, Dawn.
Maxine.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maxine Stavrianakos. As Dawn said, I'm the head of service for community safety and safer neighbourhoods. I think it may also be interesting for commissioners to know I'm also chair of the Youth Justice Board, which Andy will talk about more about his service later. And I'm also chair of the Prevent Channel panel in Sheffield. Right, Chair, do you want me to go straight into my overview now, or?
Yes, if you could just keep it brief, Maxine, because we've all had sight of the submission. Thank you.
Okay, will do. I'll do as much as possibly can then. So, the Community Safety and Safer Neighbourhood Service is a multi-agency partnership team, as we've described in the submission, and that is service led by myself and the South Yorkshire Police Partnership and Neighbourhood Superintendent. The team was first established in 2016 to improve our responsiveness and to prevent crime and antisocial behaviour. As Dawn said, I moved into Dawn service in October 20. In April 21, we managed to secure additional funding, and I think, as we mentioned in the submission, and that was primarily around an antisocial behaviour team that now will support people living in all tenures of properties and all areas in Sheffield. There are specialist antisocial behaviour resolution officers who will make the full use of tools and powers. And then we've got a team of 28 sustainable communities officers who will very much eyes and ears on the ground working with communities. We've already recruited 10 of those officers, of which 3 are from BME backgrounds, but what we noticed in the recruitment, they were originally called wardens, and we got a certain cohort of people applying for the job of wardens, a lot of ex-force staff, and we wanted it very much to represent communities, so we've changed the name of these posts to Sustainable Communities Officers, and that recruitment is going back out. We've also got, of those 28, 7 are apprenticeship posts, which will give employment opportunities in areas and increase knowledge and links with all partnership organisations, such as the police and the fire and rescue, plus community groups.
Maxine, could you just give us the headlines from your submission?
Yeah, will do. So following that, those ones, we also have the Crime and Disorder Partnership in Sheffield, which is a statutory responsibility that's made up from 5 organisations plus voluntary communities, and those 5 orgs are the police, fire and rescue, probation and health. Funding, the partnership receives funding every year both from the local authority and from the Police and Crime Commissioner to award in grants to organisations that are supporting their priorities. One of the main priorities for us is hate crime. We've seen a 17% increase in hate crime over the last 12 months. So working alongside our colleagues in police is how we target work towards that. One of the ways is the partnership funds a hate crime coordinator, and there's a hate crime action plan, and we've sent you details of that in the submission. And we're also working with the local area committees to make sure we're linking into local residents and community organisations. So that.
Thank you, Maxine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxine and Dawn. I'll come to Cadra in a second. Andy, could you introduce yourself? Just tell us the capacity you're joining us in, and if you could say a little bit about your submission.
Good afternoon. So Andy Sterling, I'm Service Manager of the Youth Justice Service. I've worked for the council for over 42 years now since leaving school. About 29 years working with children and young people, 20 years in children residential service, and the last 9 in youth justice. But I've been the service manager for the last 3.5 years. I suppose I need to declare, I know people on the commission. I've even watched a couple of them, well, one of them play football professionally in his time. I think youth justice service is a rare, if not unique, position of both being a statutory children's service and a statutory children's service within criminal justice system. So I think that puts us in a good position to see what's occurring for our young people.
Yes.
And I suppose it's fair to say that for a number of years there's been scrutiny on many parts of the criminal justice system, both locally, nationally and globally. Obviously many incidents that have of racial and social injustice that have been broadcast for us all to see. The evidence that I provided, although it may lack specific examples or incidents of evidence relating to individual actions from criminal justice agencies, I think the facts are there that children and young people from minoritized and racialized groups, which is the term we use now, not BAME, are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And obviously for some of them, their experience is far worse than their white peers. Been massive sort of input into the criminal justice system, not least by the Right Honourable David Lammy in 2016, where we were asked to look at the principle of explain or reform in our effort to improve all factors related to overrepresentation of these groups. And we thought that as a service, the renewed focus that came emanating certainly from May last year, that it's not enough for us to say that we're fair and equitable and we're not a racist service. We want to be seen as a service that is anti-racist and that's got the capacity to review and challenge their policies, adapt our practice, but also be in a strong position to recognise racism and be in a position to challenge it where we see it. And we're very much aware that some of the larger and more mature institutions that operate in the same system as we do creates significant challenge for us to be able to make significant change and impact. But we're realistic that we might be able to achieve some small, very key changes, and maybe the ones that we can influence more, certainly by being the service and also by being part of the Youth Justice Partnership, which Maxine obviously is the chair of our board. Yes. But we are committed to work and welcome the significant challenge that comes with this commission, and we see it as a positive contribution to our journey into becoming that service.
Thank you, Andy. Can I I just kind of missed the point that you were making about terminology and the terminology that you use.
Yeah. So we've got a group that we have every month. We have a meeting every month, and it used to be called the anti-racist meeting. Now it's racial awareness, and people in that group said that they didn't like the phrase BAME, that it was not representative of them themselves, people in those communities, and said that can we change it to something else? So we consulted with Wayne Reid from BASWA, the British Association of Social Workers, to ask him for any suggestions, and he came up with the phrase minoritized and racialized groups, put that to the staff, all staff to choose, and they accepted that as the new terminology for the Youth Justice Service to use going forward.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Kadra, welcome.
Thank you.
Kadra, could you say just a bit about yourself and the work that you do in the everyday? We thought it would be useful to invite you so that you could perhaps spark off the conversation as we go through. If you could just say a few words.
Yeah. So my name's Kadra Shield. I'm a service manager within the Amber project, which is part of Children and Young People Service. I've worked for Sheffield for 29 years. I've been a support worker, social worker, and now a service manager. I think in terms of the Amber project, we are working with young people who are being exploited. So that's either sexually exploited or criminally exploited. And currently within that service, I've only taken over the role quite recently, so it's only about 3 weeks. But within that time, I've already noticed a high proportion of young people who are from Black and ethnic minority group. So it's very clear within that service, there is a clear disproportion of children who we are working with from that ethnic group.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Kadra, and it's interesting that you've been in your job for 3 weeks, and Andy's been in his for 42 years. Just a slight
No, I mean, I've been in this job in terms of the service manager role, but I've worked for Sheffield for 29 years.
Ah, okay, now you're talking. All right. I'd like to introduce my my colleague Jonathan Williams. Jonathan, could you introduce yourself before asking your first question? So each of you will be invited to respond to specific questions, and sometimes the same question. So Jonathan, over to you.
Hi everyone. My name is Jonathan Williams. I'm born and bred in Sheffield. My professional career, my professional background's really been cut into two sort of areas. One, the first half of it is community, and the second half of it is in education. And throughout that career, it's been working with young people who's been identified as at risk, or whether it was hard to reach, or various different terms. And whether it was supporting young people who were post 16, who was at risk of, you know, crime, or was involved in crime, or in roles that is about reducing exclusions. And I currently work in a role within the local authority around inclusion and attendance in schools. I'm also a student doing a doctorate looking at the links between young people in education and their experience of disaffection, specifically looking at sort of Black Caribbean males. So I'm sort of knee deep in sort of this area of work, and I've been doing a lot of interviews over the past sort of year with practitioners, with young people, with adults who have formerly experienced sort of disaffection. So that's just about me. So I've got both pieces of evidence that was submitted. That's from the Youth Justice Service and communities. And so the questions are in relation to the evidence. So I'll start with sort of Andy. How you doing, Andy? You okay?
All right, thank you.
Good. The first question is to yourself is, when you say that it's not enough to say that you're not a biased or racist service, and you need to be actively anti-racist, what is the sort of racism that you aim to target in that statement?
I think it's about the conception of racism within the criminal justice system. I think it's rightly had the scrutiny when you look at the evidence that's been presented to the world, for example, and certainly some evidence sort of locally and people that had connection to Sheffield quite recently. You can see that there is that general sort of mistrust of criminal justice services, and as like I said, being part of that system, sometimes that focus gets put on us. And when you look at some of our data, for example, and some of the outcomes for our young people, so we want to be seen as a service that may be aware of some of its systems and processes that need to change, and some sort of improvements that need to be made in the way we work. But we also need to be upskilling and confident in our staff so that they are aware of where they can see racial injustice in other areas of the criminal justice system, so that they're in a better position to challenge it. Which is why we've started from a sort of bottom-up approach to try and upskill staff, increase their confidence, increase cultural awareness, to give them tools to work with young people in a certain way, to ensure that language is appropriate, and to ensure that even at the first point of contact with our young people that come to our attention, that the relationship is the key. The paramount thing is building a relationship, to say that this is a service that's in that world, but we are going to work in a certain way, and work with you in a certain way, in a fair and equitable way.
Okay. So why did you sort of feel the necessary need to explore the implementation of anti-racist practice?
I think I won't lie. You know, when the events in America last May occurred relating to George Floyd, we thought that we needed to provide a response to support our young people, their families, and the staff that we work with that would have been affected by this. Obviously, it was a deeply traumatic incident, but it, as I say, it brought that attention onto the criminal justice system, all parts of it, and it reinforced those claims of racism. So we as a management team discussed it the day after the images were transmitted around the world, and there were really strong feelings from staff like I said, I keep emphasising this point about children's service, criminal justice service, but we are, and we can't afford to ignore that. So again, following on from the work from the Lamb report in 2016, where we identified sort of several actions and we formulated a plan based on that principle of explain or reform. We knew that we had made some inroads into our work to reduce over-implementation, but we knew we got a long way to go. And one of those things that we could do straight away was to announce to the world, if you like, or whoever wanted to listen to us, that we wanted to be that service that made those bold statements, that we're looking at their policies, looking at reviewing and changing the way that they work, practice the interventions that we do with our young people, and to be recognised as an anti-racist service that challenges it when they seize it. We knew obviously that as the aftermath of the incidents in America and the extreme sort of behaviour that happened in America wasn't necessarily repeated in Sheffield. And I was listening to the earlier conversations around the riots that didn't happen in Sheffield back in 2010, and I'm old enough to remember the ones that didn't happen in 1981 as well. It's just that we thought that because it was so much in the public domain and the momentum in England was gathering, and we also was, I think, the first service to challenge the senior managers within children's services to put out a response to the service areas. I think Ruth, who's on the call today, will testify to that. Ruth was working with us next door at that time, and we thought that we needed to make a statement and urge management to make a statement about how people have been impacted by the events that were, evolving in the media and around the world.
Okay. Does anybody else as well want to sort of add to anything towards that in relation to sort of anti-racist practice? Does anyone want to add before we go on to the next one for Andy? Okay, no problem. What are some of the systematic and institutional inequalities that you seek to reduce in relation to the number of young people entering or re-entering the criminal justice system?
If you think that when you look at where the incidents may occur, it can be at the very, very first point of contact with criminal justice system. So I know there's been a lot of things said about stop and search, and I think the data certainly fluctuates around what that data is. But certainly when you look at the systems that young people get involved in, if they get through the stop and search process, we've developed sort of information booklets for young people to give them information around their right to stop and search, what they need to be doing, how they need to conduct themselves so they don't get sort of any further into any trouble that they may or may not be in at that point. And also give them an option to where to complain about certain things. But then when a young person progresses to our system, we've got a new system in place now, our out of court disposal process, so the youth outcome panel. So we do assessments on children before there's any indication about outcomes for them. So we get the relationship started to form. We look at all aspects of their lives, and again, I think there's a lot of factors that influence criminality that lie outside the criminal justice system, poverty, depravity, certain issues, social issues and societal issues that we have no impact on. We might feed into it, but we don't have no impact on changing. And so I think we need to work as hard as we can in whatever way we can to certainly improve that trust in the criminal justice system from some groups, so that trust can be, like I said, from the police, through the court system, and even through ourselves. And you look at the custody officers in police stations, the solicitors, the appropriate adult service that we provide, the court staff, the district judges, the magistrates. I think you've got to accept, I think, that you want the best outcomes for young people, but you've got to have that culture of transparency and openness and willingness to identify and accept the issues that there are if you're going to evoke any change. And I think that's where we are. So we've looked at all our systems and processes, and like I said, we've gone from day one of the first contact with the children and their families, because that's an important factor as well. Their families will have had more of that lived experience predominantly, more of that mistrust built up, more of that skepticism about services. And certainly from our point of view, and I might be doing myself out of the job here, which is fine, it's that early help, it's the intervention early on. That I think that's what I would like to change. If I could change one thing, it would be that identification, early help early on. And we know that when we look at early help and prevention services, the disproportionality in their services isn't there. They're jumping over them and coming to me or coming to us. And I think that's what needs to change, I think, dramatically. So I think while we can put our house in order, we're only a very, very small part of this system, but we'll keep doing it.
Yeah, you mentioned as well, because I'm just double checking if I'm hearing it right, because from the previous sort of session that we had, one of the invitees spoke about the initial interaction with sort of the, for instance, the police and young people. And are you sort of referring to that as well in terms of an area that needs to be sort of looked at? What sort of things you sort of mean in terms of that initial?
I think definitely, because it's like any young person that gets involved with the criminal justice system, there's always an alternative way to progress them through a system. The evolution of restorative practice, for example, and certainly from my experience within children's homes, days have gone now where kids used to break a cup against the wall, used to get took to court for that, for criminal damage. And the idea was that the court used to fine you £5. I used to give the kid pocket money, take £1 off him and give it back to court. What was the point of that? I might as well march him down to Wilkinson's and let him pay 29 pence for a new cup and tidy the mess up. So I think restorative practices, certainly that no formal action from getting services that are skilled in working with children and young people and skilled at assessing their needs, looking at the holistic needs that they've got, rather than what's presented to them in relation to a criminal offence. And I think in Sheffield, the movement's there, that child first, offender second penny has dropped, without a doubt it has, not just in our world, but also in the criminal exploitation world, where kids are being exploited. It's as simple as that. Yeah, they are committing crimes whilst being exploited, but they are being exploited first as a child. And so I think that the whole cultural change is about working with young people per se, but working with young people with those lived experiences that some of these minoritized and racialized groups have got that no other person can have unless you've lived that life yourself. So I think that's where I would see the change. It's that first touch, that first contact that needs to be proportionate to what is occurring, but also have an understanding of what else is occurring in that kid's life.
Okay.
Or may have occurred.
Yeah. Could you explain what you mean by explain or reform, and how that would improve racial disparities in the criminal justice system?
I suppose there's two ways of looking at it, because there will be services that are working really, really well and have got no issues. So what needs to happen there is you need to share that best practice, share that good practice amongst the other services that may have problems or issues relating to this. So if we've got, for example, we've got 4 young people in custody in 2019 and 20, and 2 of those were from minoritized and racialized groups. So that's 50% of our very, very low base of custody for a city the size of Sheffield. It's fantastic practice, but you can't celebrate that too much, because you've got 50% of those kids that really are twice as overrepresented, or nearly 3 times overrepresented, from the kids that actually live in Sheffield. So that gives you an idea of the harsher sentences that these young people may be getting from the judicial system. So the idea is explain why there is 2 young people from minoritized and racialized groups in prison when there's only 23% of those kids that make up the entire population of Sheffield. So, and then also, if we've got a number of breaches for young people, so when a kid doesn't comply with their order, the system's in place so we can get them back on track, meet with the parents, identify the issues, and then hopefully try and resolve it without taking them back to court to get a longer sentence or whatever. And our intention is always to take young people back to court to revoke their sentence for good progress, and we do that quite successfully. But if we're not doing that enough times with people from minoritized racialized groups, if we are increasing our breach activity for these minoritized racialized groups, then we need to explain that to people. And if we can't explain it, then we need to change it and stop doing it. And whatever the tools and systems and processes and interventions we can use, then we need to be putting them in place. So I suppose that, if that explains it for you.
Yeah. There's a side question from that. Is why do you feel that is occurring? sort of the disproportion in terms of what you've just highlighted there?
I think there are a lot of reasons that happen before young people come to us. So whatever has occurred in a young person's life before they come to the attention of us has an impact. So as I said before, we know that there are a lot of issues, certainly around young people growing up in certain family groups, lone parent families, less likely to seek access to early help and prevention services, the effect of poverty, individual high exclusion rates, peer pressure, fear, exploitation, a load of disadvantages that increase the likelihood of offending that have not been either identified, assessed, or improved, unfortunately, until they've come to attention of the criminal justice system that unfortunately have come to the attention of us. Now we've got a chance to reverse that through the out of court process, and we do where we can. But unfortunately, some of the crimes that are committed by some of these children cannot be dealt with in the out of court arena. Where we can, we will. So the youth conditional caution is our highest that we can deliver without going to court. But unfortunately, some of the crimes aren't, and that's why we've also adopted some systems to do a full review on cases that do come in at the highest level. And since 2016, we've only had one person that was known to our service that was a part of these groups that actually committed the most serious offence against another person. So we looked at everything that was involved in that kid's life, and we identified that there were a lot of unmet needs that this kid had got because he'd not come to attention of anybody before he killed somebody.
Yeah. Well, that probably moves on nicely to the next question. Can you tell us what work you have been doing with partner agencies to implement your anti-racist action plan?
Well, obviously, because we are that multi-agency service that the Youth Justice Service is, so we're made up of many partners. A lot of those partners are funding partners as well. So we've got the police through the Police and Crime Commissioner that works with us. We've got health, we've got probation, we've got mental health, we've got liaison and diversion services that work in police stations and form part of our out of court panel. And we've got speech and language therapists, substance misuse services. And then we also have got our partners that are higher up the scale. So the Youth Justice Board, for example, Community Safety Partnership that Maxine sits on, and the Clinical Commission Group, Local Criminal Justice Board. So we've got all partners involved that are working with us. And what we did to try and get them on board, no pun intended, but was to issue these new mission, values and position statements that we got endorsed by the board to show the turn of the dial, if you like, to see where we wanted to go and what we wanted to achieve. And part of that was to increase the challenge to the partners on the board and to invite challenge back to us. We do know we've got quite a lot of gaps within our data collation and our sort of in-depth analysis of our data. We know the headline figures, we know the people that make up our service, but actually some of the more in-depth stuff and the so what and the what now, and that's the story. Now give us the ending sort of stuff. So all the partners there are on board with us, and we've worked with different partners in different ways.
Yeah. In the submission is evidence that you recognise.
Sorry, Jonathan. Sorry, can I just divert? Can I just divert you towards Dawn and Maxine, given the time as it's 3.
Thank you, Kevin.
And then perhaps come back to Andy, so you can take a breath.
Okay, so no problem. So, okay, how long have we got, by the way, so I can just keep my focus on time? Is it?
Yeah, you've got about half an hour.
Okay, so Dawn and Maxine, as the Sheffield City Council Director of Communities, what are your thoughts on Sheffield City Council's arrangements for working with BAME communities on crime and justice pipeline, including how the Sheffield City Council responds to hate crimes and incidences against people from Black, Asian and other minoritized backgrounds?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I mean, on the hate crime aspect, I'll divert to Maxine if that's okay. But generally, as the Director of Communities, I would say that we need to improve our engagement with our community partners. I think that's something that we're pressing and that we're going to be pushing as we move forward. One of the aspirations for our communities is to be in and of our communities and to be reflective of the communities that we serve as a council. So hopefully we'll be able to move into that quickly. I think when we look at hate crime, I think there's a lot of sort of promotional work that we need to do with our partners on sort of the reasons why people are suffering from hate crime, and actually getting the truth out there, myth busting, stopping some of the hate campaigns and the non-truths that are coming out about certain aspects in our communities. We've seen that with COVID, we've seen that around some of the issues with Brexit, etc. And I think that as the Director of Communities, I would be wanting to work shoulder to shoulder with our community partners to make sure that we get the right messages out there within our communities. So I mean, generally on the sort of details of hate crime, I'll pass over to Maxine and the work that they're doing on the hate crime group, if that's okay, Jonathan.
Yep. Yep. You're mute, Maxine.
I've got a really bad cough, sorry, that's why I was putting myself on mute. So, right, as Dawn said, and I think if, let's think, hate crime is one of our priorities in the Community Safety Partnership, which is why we established the Hate Crime Priority Group. And though there are council and police officers involved in that from the partnership, it's led by an independent member and it has community groups on, because so that we were really clear that we wanted to hear from people with lived experiences in those community groups. And I think one of the things we found recently, Jonathan, some time ago, we did a lot of work around what's a hate crime and what's a hate incident. And we, alongside police colleagues, we put out a lot of information. And I think in meetings I've attended just recently, some of that information is not as widely known at the moment. So I think, as Dawn said, we want to do some publicity around that, run some campaigns. We've got the Hate Crime Week coming up, and we really want to major on some of that work, linking in with our hate crime coordinator. I don't want to repeat a lot of what was in the submission, because I'm sure you've seen that, but we're quite unique. It's a partnership funded post, and I think in the past these posts were funded year on year, which sometimes affected how we were continuing to press on with things and the sustainability. So we've now funding that post for 3 years, so we can get that action plan to be working a lot better, joining the groups in. Some of the work we're doing is around the third-party reporting centres, because I think Sheffield, like a lot of areas, has got issues around people reporting hate crime. Not everybody wants to report it to the police. We funded the Stop Hate UK line in Sheffield for 3 years, actually, and that was 10k a year to fund that. And the feedback, the reports we were getting from that weren't, we didn't increase our awareness of hate crime. So we're putting money into developing the third-party reporting centres, because again, I'm not sure if Commissioner's aware, lots of organisations are third-party reported centres for hate crime, but they're probably trained up originally, and if they're not taking lots of referrals, by the time somebody comes in, sometimes they're not as clued up as to what their next steps are. So we're putting work into supporting them and funding, so that they're certainly, alongside the police, the first line of referral. And I think we're also working with the National Hate Crime Centre. because they were very clear and supportive on when the group wrote our policy and our processes, and we've purchased training from them. There's going to be some online training that we can offer to all groups, but then there'll be some dedicated training for council members, senior officers and frontline staff, so they really understand and working through the day-to-day issues. Did that answer your question, Jonathan? Sorry, I'm trying to answer it without going too much into the submission, because I know you'll have read that already.
Yeah, no problem, because the next question, you sort of led on to the sort of next question, and it's to, do you feel that there's the trust and confidence in reporting to authorities? Do you think that's a problem for victims of hate crime?
Yeah, I think it is, Jonathan, being really honest, and I know you'll have police colleagues and talking to them later. Police colleagues have worked really hard on some of the ways they're dealing with how they investigate hate crimes. I'm not stealing their thunder, but they've passed over the reporting from their central response teams into their neighbourhood teams since they've re-established neighbourhood working. So the police officers reporting hate crime are already working in the area, will know some of the community issues, and will be able to establish those relationships. So that's one area. We also carried out some work again alongside police colleagues, and we had I don't know if anybody attended this, we used to have regular hate crime groups where police would bring along anonymised case studies that we could look at them and say, well, what would we have done? Were there other suggestions? And I think as we come out of COVID, I'd like to re-establish that, but I think we could do more with that, Jonathan, and I think we need to look at how we would develop that and work alongside the local community groups to make sure we've got more groups who are working on the ground and seeing some of these cases that aren't reported that could feed into that general picture. But definitely more we can do, which is where I think the third-party reporting centres come in, and we need to publicise what they're doing and how people contact them as well.
Yeah, do you have any sort of supporting data to explain the reasons behind sort of people not reporting hate crimes?
That's a difficult one, Jonathan, but I think when the few referrals we got through the Stop Hate UK, it was, as you said, people didn't feel confident. That group I mentioned to you, they were saying to us that sometimes after the police colleagues had gone in and reviewed it, they didn't get feedback later. So they told their issue, they were explained what the police colleagues would do next, but then there wasn't an outcome. And I think that's why police colleagues have reviewed some of that and are using the neighbourhood police. So there's those closer links. But I think also that's something we're putting into the third-party reported centres. You know, why did you come here today rather than reporting to police? And a question will be, can we pass this referral over to the police? And if people are saying no, we'll be asking why. Also working with the National Hate Crime Centre, we're looking at some of the stats they have got nationwide, Jonathan, because I'm sure, as you know, it's not just a Sheffield issue, it's a national issue. So we want to compare. And there was some work the University of Huddersfield and Sheffield did some time ago, looking at the makeup of our communities. What would be an approximate amount of hate crime or hate incidents they were expecting to see? And are there areas where those numbers looked okay, or were they really diverse? And I think as we get those third-party reporting centres back up, well, they're running now, but we reskill them. That's something I want to look there. So if, for instance, communities maybe like Burngreave or area were having a lower than expected number, we could target some work with that hate crime coordinator and the hate crime group. Why is it in particular happening in this area? But I think the data is national, we can look at it, but there's work still to be done, because it's the numbers we've got in Sheffield and the information is not big numbers, Jonathan.
Okay.
Jonathan, can I just Can I just
Well,
see if Kadra would like to comment on anything that she's heard, anything that resonates with the work that she's doing at the moment?
Not at the moment. I think I do. I mean, one of the things that I did want to bring up was around some things that Andy was saying, but do you want me to talk about that now, or shall I?
If it's not where you think we're going at the moment, then
yeah,
no, it's okay. But before Jonathan asks his next question, can I just ask Maxine, are you working with people like Sarah Pullman then around the South Yorkshire Police and Hate Crime?
We are. We work, as you've seen from the submission, we have the local team, but we also attend the county-wide community safety, where we will work with Sarah. I think what's slightly unique in Sheffield is that in the other three forces in South Yorkshire, Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster, the hate crime coordinator is a police-funded approach. In Sheffield, we very much wanted, in agreement with our police colleagues, a partnership-funded approach, because we think that brings an extra challenge and extra work. So that's pretty important to us in Sheffield. And just something, sorry, I don't know if this is off. I just wanted to mention as well for Jonathan, if that's. We've recently, a couple of years ago, we did very much, and some of your commissioners have been involved with some of this work around hate crime graffiti that was in the city, and posters and stickering, because we had a service that removed anything in 24 hours. So that was good, often a lot shorter timescales than that, and our outside contractors, Amy, had only ever once missed that timescale once in 2 years. So it was well. But what we weren't doing is notifying and recording. Where are those stickers going up then? Where is that hate crime graffiti? Looking at that bigger picture. So a lot of work recently has been done with that, reporting into police, and that helps, I think, Jonathan, with that bigger picture. It might not be individuals reporting, but what are we seeing that's happening in that area generally? That with the establishment of the local area committees, that will give us far improved links and tensions monitoring. So I know that doesn't answer your question directly, but I think it's important for that wider picture.
Okay. What I'll do, I'll just go on to a few other questions, and then I'll try and jump back to sort of Andy to see if Kendra can sort of get questions in as well. But I've got a question in relation to what you've highlighted in your submission of evidence around job responses from BAME communities. And that is, what was the BAME community networks that you used in order to share job opportunities with those communities?
Well, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head with the BME communities. What we circulated them through VAS, and I'm not saying that they're BME, and then community groups with our local area committees that are being established, and links in the area. So I think that was definitely an issue for you, and as we go out as we go back out to recruitment, we are working very much with our HR colleagues. We're going to put posters up in area offices, like I can see Gulnaz is here, and we work very closely with Gulnaz in her area, and put posters up advertising for those communities, as well as briefing community groups. But any suggestions that the commissioners have got would be much appreciated, Jonathan.
Okay. And also in your evidence, you state that the annual local authority and crime commissioner funding positively impacts on BAME communities. What have been the outcomes of these activities, and how is this positive impact measured?
Okay, well, I think I came in towards the end, so there was some funding from Unity Gym, so I presume they've raised some of their issues. It was very much. There was also the Brendan Ingle Foundation, and working with young people to talk to each other, come together in mixed communities to establish relations and hopefully combat some of the issues around the serious organised crime. And I think and other sporting activities such as the football. I think what we've seen with COVID this time, though, that has affected a lot of the face-to-face interaction. So that's something for us to pick up going forward of how we look to utilise that spending, because at the moment we're working through the next round of funding, Jonathan. But it very much was linked to some of the sporting, I say, bringing community groups together. We worked across the community safety partnership with young people about not carrying knives, and certainly in areas where we've got serious organised crime, it was looking into those areas, how we work with the schools and education about showing people or identifying other areas where they could put their time and energy into it rather than following through into gangs. And it was along those sorts of lines.
Okay, and probably a question for Dawn as the directors. We understand that the council's brought the youth provision in-house from the autumn 2020. What are the key plans, challenges moving forward for work with BAME young people?
I think one of the key challenges is to establish trust and inclusivity. I think we very much want to, with the extra investment that we've got into youth services, and by bringing it back into the council, we very much want to look at youth voice, and that actually young people are working with us to develop the services that actually they want to see. So we're wanting to actually get more BAME young people on our youth council and youth cabinet. We're wanting to be much more visible within those communities, working with community partners, but also working with young people. We want our additional staffing to represent the communities, so that when our young people are engaging with us, it's reflective of the communities that they live in, that we can get more trusted adults in those areas to work with those young people. But I think the main thrust of it is more inclusion, involvement and youth voice, and that's the main press for the work that we're wanting to do with youth services. And picking up on one of the points that Andy made, is we are working very closely with our colleagues in children and families on the early intervention and prevention part of that work, because we recognise that that's an area that we do need to improve. And now we've got the opportunity, by bringing new services back in-house, to not only put council sort of resources into that, but also to work very, very closely with our community partners in that area. So there's some of the things that we're wanting to do with the BAME young people in our city.
Okay, so I'll move back to sort of Andy and Kendra, if you can come in to this question, because it sort of leads on from the question I've just previously asked. How would you describe the diversity of the young people that you work with compared to the diversity of the youth justice workforce? So that's a question sort of both of you in terms of your services.
Me to answer first? It doesn't bear comparison, unfortunately. It doesn't bear comparison. The workforce in the youth justice service is nowhere near the represented groups that we have within the young people that access our service. And the situation is getting worse, if I'm being honest. And Kendra might be talking about this in a moment, but our sort of one manager from that group is leaving us to go and join Kendra's service, which is good because he's working in the same area, you know, and the early help and prevention sort of area. But certainly with ourselves, and certainly when you look at the levels of management, so I'm the one strategic leader. I've got one currently out of 6 operational managers, 4 practitioners, 2 admin staff, slightly better in the volunteers and sessional workers, although it's still only 14 out of about 70. And I think that's where the issues lie, predominantly with our service, because there is sort of a qualification bar to get in, and so we seem to be able to attract people down the lower end of the scale. And unfortunately for us, we've as an opportunity to improve that, but I got knocked back at the first hurdle. So the original person who submitted the first piece of evidence back in October last year left our service and gone into quality assurance service. And we thought that'd be a fantastic opportunity to really put a positive statement out about what kind of person we wanted to become the assistant service manager in this service. And HR point blank refused to let me do that. So I could just put the generic one that's been around since about 1975, but I couldn't put that in. I even explored the idea of allowing people to identify their ethnicity on an application form. And I really understand why, back in the day, like I said, I've been around a long time, back in the day, why if people identified their ethnicity on an application form, that might get put in the bin and not even looked at. But I think, why don't we give people choice to think, I want to tell you what I am, I'll tell you what I'm about. You can make assumptions about certain names, I suppose, but you don't want to be doing that anyway. But I was really disappointed that there was no conversation to be had. There was no, it was just a straight blank response from an HR representative, not even a manager in the service, to say you can't do that. And I thought, you know, it was the time where all the sort of drive for change was really, really at the forefront of people's minds, and I just got knocked back at the first hurdle. And I'm recruiting again now, and again I can't do it. They won't let me do it. They won't let me be a bit more stronger, a bit more forceful in what I want to have in this, or what we want to have in this service. And it's not right. It's not right.
And how does that sort of disparity impact on the service delivery to the diverse population of young people in Sheffield?
It's bound to have an impact. I mean, I suppose it's not right to assume that only certain staff can work with certain groups. It's not right to assume that. But when you identify a certain sort of mistrust in certain services, for example, you might have a better chance of increasing that trust if somebody who's like the person, that looks similar, that talks similar, that has the same lived experiences, that has grown up with the same issues. And you can't always make that assumption either. I've got 2 black male staff that work with us. One's been on one side of the rules, one's been on the other side of the rules, shall I say, and they've had very different experiences growing up, but they've both got to offer their experience. You know, the one that's had some issues can see how his life's turned around, and he doesn't have to follow that route that might have been mapped out for him by certain people. And the other fella can say, this is how I've survived in Sheffield as a black male growing up and bringing up a black family now, you know what I mean? So it's had an impact, and like I say, what we've got, unfortunately, within our service, we've got people that may be afraid to speak out about issues and concerns when they see, I can't think of a different way of saying it, all the white faces, especially on a process like we've got here, where we've just got little pictures on screens looking out at them. You know, I think it's a serious issue when people can't be the true authentic self. And we need to create that safe space for people to talk about things, and that's what we are trying to do. You know, but it is difficult when the people that can change that for you won't have a dialogue with you to affect that change.
Okay. Kendra, do you want to?
Jonathan, sorry, I'm just before Kadra comes in, and I am super enthusiastic to hear what you've got to say, Kadra. You've just been talking about not being allowed to appoint and have almost a positive action focus to your recruitment. So this is an organisation that's taking an anti-racist stance in a larger organisation. Sorry, a department that's taking an anti-racist stance in an organisation that sees itself as anti-racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're identifying at the first step is a lack of shared values within the organisation to actually, you know, to take you over the finish line.
Yeah, I have other words, Kevin, but you summed it up better than me.
Okay, Kadra, thank you, Andy. Yeah.
I guess for me, coming into this end of working with children who are being exploited, I think my staff team at the moment is predominantly white British. I have a manager, as Andy has said, who I have, shall I say the word stolen, Andy?
Yep.
From Andy's team. And I guess for me, I think it is clearly that we have got to look at recruitment and how we push that forward, because I think for me, we have got a lot of young people who are working with people who they don't see are seeing it from their viewpoint. I've currently done some DIP audits recently on a couple of children's files, and the bit for me is about that early intervention. So that early intervention of and it's particularly one child that I've looked at, and he was clearly saying at when we had when we were completing assessment, he was talking about having very clear message of, I'm spoken to differently at school. I don't want to be at school. This is a young boy who's now is being exploited, has been missing from education, has been missing from home, and he's not going to be the only one within our service. So for me, you know, we've got to look at obviously recruitment, but again, it's about what Andy was talking about in terms of making sure that we are looking at early intervention. We are doing that. We are getting more social workers. We are looking at more intervention workers, and working with communities, being really clear about the communities that we're working with and reflecting the communities and getting the communities to have a say about provisions and what we're doing in the communities.
Yeah. A question back to sort of your answer, Andy. In your submission, you've evidenced that you recognise children from certain groups, because the term BAME can be pretty broad, but children from certain ethnic groups were disproportionately more likely to be involved in the youth justice service than their white counterparts. Can you clarify which ethnic groups the submission refers to?
Yeah, so the largest sort of group that make up the old BAME sort of group is the mixed young people. So the actual sort of black young people are the lowest of that group.
So in terms of mixed, what would you mean?
So it could be Afro-Caribbean, white British mixed, or Asian white British mixed. So the last figure I've got for up to 2020, March 21, is 71.4 white, 12.5 mixed, 5.7 Asian, 3.8 black, and 5.7 other, which could be sort of Eastern European sort of people, because there's some anomalies in the I'm white, I'm whatever. So there is some anomalies there, and one Chinese person. So
yeah, if you got any sort of, can you provide us with any understanding of the reasons behind these disparities?
I suppose all I can see is again where children may not have access to services or interventions that would have prevented them from getting in for whatever reason. Like I've said before, you know, I don't want to take the time again, but certainly that mistrust. There is some institutionalized stuff that gets played out in social media that people have got no lived experience of, but there was an understanding that happens there, so it might happen to me. And also there is some familial stuff that, you know, I'm working on third generation kids now. You know, I've got the grandkids of some of the kids that I first worked with, and I can see it there. You know, going back to the days when the first young people in Sheffield got killed in what were sort of classed as the gang sort of issues around, you know, S3, S4 in Sheffield, 14 years ago now. Some of those people are still there. I got that mistrust for services, but unfortunately are involved at the very highest level in services as well.
Yeah,
you know, in criminal justice services.
Yeah, and a similar question in relation to your evidence. You highlight the involvement of certain ethnic groups in the youth justice service disproportionately increases as the gravity of the sentence increases. How does this differ across ethnicities?
Again, it's the I suppose you could say that I think the statistics actually say that young people from minoritized racialized group are committing less serious offences, but they are getting sentenced to custody more than white young people compared. And the gravity score of those offences are maybe higher in the white British groups than the mixed and the black and the Asian groups. And as I say, it's a different type of offences that may have a different outcome in court. So we do sort of look at all our sentencing options when we do get opportunities to do that through pre-sentence reports and such. And we do make sure that we look at our pre-sentence reports through a cultural lens. And it is sometimes a balancing act to put everything down that would influence a magistrate or a district judge to come up with an outcome for a young person that would meet their needs, that may not necessarily meet all their criminogenic needs, but would meet their other needs in a more effective way. But unfortunately, the circumstances of their offences, you know, depending on the gravity score, leads that we can't do it out of court. We can do all the services that we will do, but unfortunately that criminal record will still be there. And then unfortunately what you get then is that unfortunately that child, that young person has got that record for a very long time and has difficulty moving up when they get older. And then there's also that, I'm sure you've heard that concept of adultification in certain groups where there is a perceived notion that young people from certain ethnicities are less innocent, more resilient, and therefore less need of protection, which is played out in all services involved, you know, police, education, social care, health even, that there's that streetwise, resilient, aggressive, mature, manipulative, or even sometimes confrontational element that leads these children into not being classed as children.
And in your experience, what ethnic groups have you seen sort of those labels attached to?
I would say it's predominantly black young people. And you know, I would say that if you're looking at, I mean, Cadra will have more information, I'm sure, or may have when she gets settled into the post, but the groups that make up the most predominant and probably problematic gangs in Sheffield are quite varied. You know, we've got certain groups that probably the biggest white council estate in Sheffield and probably the second biggest large white council estate in Sheffield. They're the two most problematic groups, with the leaders being predominantly white people. So there is I think there's a misconception sometimes about who is involved in which, and certainly when you think about it, what level they're involved at, because the lower down, the more chance you are being exploited, whether you're a child or an adult. And there's certainly some adults being exploited as well as kids in the gang world. So I just think it's, while young people might be involved in it from certain ethnicities, they have no power or influence within them groups. It just adds to their exploitation experience, unfortunately.
I would agree, Andy. I think the two largest groups are from predominantly white areas in Sheffield, working class areas. Yeah.
Kevin, can I ask another question? Because I'm conscious of time. Can I ask another?
Yeah, if you could ask one that everyone could respond to, that would be great. But you know, just see how you can get on. We're already overrunning, so
okay.
I think we need to try to maybe focus this last question.
Okay, and well, everybody can sort of give me a response from their perspective of working in communities. So my question is more in connection to young people. But I think, to be honest, in Don's world and Maxine's world and everybody's world here, young people are very key. And I think sort of looking at the experience here as well. So, you know, Andy, you've said you've worked here for 42 years, and it's a similar question I've asked sort of other guests. Looking over the years and how things have been, whether it's the past 20 years or past 30 years in relation to this area of young people being disaffected, do you feel like the situation's actually improving in terms of the outcomes for some of these young people? Do you think it's actually sort of not much different from it was 10, 15 years ago? Or do you think it's actually gradually getting worse? And what's your sort of reason? So I'll start with Dawn first of all, because it's been quite.
Okay. I think that from my experience of living in Sheffield, I don't live there now, but my experience of living in Sheffield, I would say that whether the experience is getting worse or whether actually our recognition of the experiences that young people are having is more heightened, I think is probably what I would reflect on. So I would say that I've got more of an awareness, not that I think that we're doing enough at the moment to, as we've talked before about, to give sort of early help and support to those young people. I think there's more we can do in that area. But I think that I'm more aware of some of the issues that and I think I need to learn an awful lot more personally, and I think I need to work much more closely with the young people with the lived experience, and I need to, and as the director of communities, I think it's incumbent on me to bring those voices forward. As I said, in the development of the sort of work that we do sort of in future, so that would be my position on it, that from a personal perspective I have more awareness of it now than I previously did, which I think is a good thing. Whether or not things have got worse or better, I think that I need to hear from the young people themselves about how they feel, because perception is, I think, as important as actuality. So if people perceive that things are getting worse, that's an issue for us, whether the statistics tell us they are or they aren't. So that would be my position, Jonathan.
Okay, Maxine, briefly, we'll respond to everything.
Very briefly, I'd say, agreeing a lot with Dawn, but I'd also say, Jonathan, I think what gives me hope is people are more honest now. Honest, we're talking, I recently was talking to some, they were black guys actually, ex-gang members, who were talking to me and saying, you've got to be honest about your problem before you can solve it. And too often in the past, people were hiding stuff and I think, sorry to be, the stuff we're seeing at the moment, even with the England football team, and making it, front page, that's what gives me hope, Jonathan, is all I'd say. But as Dawn says, we need to do a lot more work on it about getting those voices.
Okay, Kedra, do you want to?
I guess for me, it's more that we have got a better idea of it, and I think it has been going on, but I think we've got a better understanding of particularly children who are being exploited. I guess for me, it's about, like Dawn says, about get that communication, making sure that we are communicating with the young people and hear their voices. Is it worse, or is it that we actually don't know enough about what their lived experiences are?
And finally, Andy.
Again, I think it's the way you interpret it, what's happening, because when I went to school, I know Dawn's on the call, but went to a school on the Manor area of Sheffield, not if you know it, and I think it was the school that had the first race inclusion unit in the school. And the reason we had it, because the kids were getting beat up every single day. They left 15 minutes earlier than we did, because they were getting beat up by people every single day. They even had a police person on the gate at some points. So that was in the sort of mid to late 70s, 19s, if anybody says. But when you look at the custody figures now, for example, the children and young people in custody are the lowest they've ever been. So you look at the disproportionality in those low figures, the problem still is big. And I think social media has got a massive role in it. As Maxine said, whatever happened at 10:30 on Sunday night was around the world, and these 3 young black males got the treatment that they got. Unbelievable how that happened and how it turned from where we were sat last week when we just won the semi-final. You know what I mean? So I just think that every aspect of the world may have made some improvements, but it doesn't take much to bring it straight back down to base one. And unfortunately, the momentum needs to be kept at the forefront of everybody's ideas and innovations into practice. I know that the year 16 month that we've had maybe prevented some of that, but I think it's also provided some focus for people as well, because we've developed ideas and innovations and creativities in our interventions that we can deliver it to more people more often in this kind of way that we're doing now on this screen, where there's 29 people looking in. So I think there is some improvements, but I certainly also think that the problem is there, and I think people are a little bit more stronger now, a bit more confident in identifying the problem, speaking up about it, and I think services are generally turning that dial around into a more positive direction, but it still needs to be put a little bit more on speed.
Okay. Okay. That's all my questions, Kevin.
Thank you.
I could ask more, but I know I haven't got the time. So thanks a lot.
Yes, it is 3:40. It is 3:41, and it's been a great session, a very informative session. I'm very tempted, but I know it's been a long day for the commissioners, and so if commissioners do have additional questions, because I have seen some interesting observations already, would Andy, Dawn, Cadra, Maxine, would you be open to us sending through questions if there are any additional ones that people haven't been able to ask in the time that we've been allotted?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please.
Yeah. It's been a very open and frank session. I've really appreciated this, and also the questioning that has come from the commissioners, and in this case Jonathan and others in the background. So much appreciated to our guests today. You are right, we do have a lot of work to do, not just here in the commission, but post the commission, and hopefully you can be part of that journey in terms of working towards our recommendations, and then post the recommendations in terms of implementation. So thank you very much for today, and hopefully we can stay in contact. Commissioners, thank you also for your contributions today.